Been moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Forbes. Call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried. Council, we have several sets of workshop minutes that have been included with the package. These are from April 15th, May 13th, July 15th, and July 22nd of 2024. Any errors or omissions from those meeting minutes as presented? Hearing none, they've been moved by Councillor Murray. Is there second by Councillor Back? Call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried. All right, Council, the three items up for discussion tonight all sort of follow public discussions that we have had on these topics in the past. When we were, just to refresh, actually maybe I'll leave most of it to Mr. Milburn, but we had a discussion about DCCs, ACCs, the new regime from the provincial government for collecting back funds for public infrastructure in the community. And there were quite a number of questions at the time about the ACCs and how it could be applied. And so in the meeting, we bifurcated the issue. We supported the part that was more time sensitive, and then we returned this item to a workshop, tonight's workshop, because we couldn't reach a consensus with the council. There was a desire for additional information at that time. And so that's where we're at for the first item. We don't normally have three items on a workshop, and so we'll have to play it by ear whether we get through the third item or not, just because we want to leave it open for people to ask questions back and forth and get additional information. We also, with the format for workshops, don't tend to seek out decisions. Usually what's happening is we're getting additional information, clarifying questions, and then giving our feedback to staff. And the main decisions get made at a regular meeting of council as soon as reasonably practical. And some of these will be returning as early as the very beginning of February for consideration by council. So at this point, I'm going to turn the matter over to Mr. Milburn to refresh us on where we're at with ACCs and give us his new information.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Your Worship, members of council. This is a detailed topic, and happy to answer questions along the way or at the end with Your Worship's discretion. Again, this is an item returning, and hopefully will provide some additional detail in my presentation, hopefully answer all your questions today as we move forward. The next event that would occur after tonight is if we hear questions from council, hopefully we answer them all tonight. And then our goal is to bring back the ACC or amenity cost charges bylaw back to council at a regular meeting. So at that regular meeting, council then can debate the pros and cons, and staff are recommending moving forward as soon as possible. So here is tonight's presentation.
I'd like to add just 30 seconds to that. So, so we have until the end of the year to implement the ACC. But it's causing a lot of concern out there that we don't have a defined policy at this time. And so we don't want to wait. We want to get it out there so that people can make plans, and as development proposals come forward, they don't have this great big unknown variable in the middle of the mix. So while we are given by the province till the end of the year, we'd really like to address this as reasonably quickly as we can.
And as I speak to, it'll become more and more obvious as I answer the questions too, just as to why that urgency is very helpful. So just to start, very briefly, development often results in population and employment growth.
Mr. Milburn, can I ask, Mr. Stewart had an additional comment on that, if that's okay. Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, I would just like Dan to, sorry, I'm getting an echo here. I'd just like Dan to clarify what happens if we don't actually put this in place in terms of potential lost income.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. I will do that in my first slide.
Great.
Excellent. All right. So development often results in population and employment growth, which creates demand for new infrastructure and amenities. And in particular, the focus of tonight's conversation is those amenities that are demanded by new population and employment growth. So this report in tonight's agenda, and what I'll be speaking about today, is focused on how the district currently finances the construction of new and improved amenities, and how the current approach should be changed in response to provincial legislation. So specifically, staff are recommending that the existing community amenity charges community amenity contribution policy, be replaced with a new amenity cost charges bylaw. And that is attached to the agenda. And then that bylaw could be updated over time. So this approach was recommended through the Province of British Columbia Development Approvals Process Review in 2019, and also by the BC Canada Expert Panel on the Future of Housing Supply and Affordability in 2021. And then the provincial government amended legislation in the fall of 2023, allowing local governments, it's enabling legislation, council may adopt an ACC bylaw. So another key driver, and this gets to the heart of the issue I think that Mr. Stewart raises, is another key driver of this change is Bill 44. So Bill 44 was the legislation that mandated that council and local governments across British Columbia approve an interim housing needs report, which set out council saw and reviewed in October, set out the need between 2021 and 2041, the need for 22,000, approximately 400 additional units. Then Bill 44 says, once that is defined, the zoning bylaw and official community plan must be updated to accommodate that number of units by the end of 2025. Okay. And if council were to not adopt an ACC bylaw, and this is Mr. Stewart's question, if council were to not adopt an ACC bylaw, then all of those units, which are going to be pre-zoned, developers could come in and develop them and not have to pay an amenity cost charge, because right now, an amenity cost charge is only triggered at rezoning. So in the future world, if an ACC bylaw is adopted, the trigger is building permit or subdivision. So it would capture all that development, all those 22,400 units, and ensure that they pay their fair share toward amenities that are going to be needed by those residents who would be moving into those units. So it's really fundamental that we move forward with an ACC bylaw in that new regime under Bill 44. So today I'll be quickly covering the financial principles that we've used to develop the amenity cost charges bylaw. A brief reminder of the community amenity contribution policy that we currently use. I'll mention some of the important points about the proposed amenity cost charges bylaw, or ACC bylaw. If you hear me say ACC, it's the same thing as amenity cost charges bylaw, ACC. And then I'll be covering why is the change needed now, which I highlighted at the beginning. All right, so the financial principles. So the fundamental principle of having any amenity cost charge is that development should help pay for the impacts on the community. Those impacts should not be borne purely by the taxpayer, the general taxpayer. Or the other alternative is to simply not have the amenity, right? Just don't fund it. But if the amenity is demanded and needed in the community, we need some viable way to pay for it. And that's what an amenity cost charge does. It provides a viable way to charge it to development, the people that benefit from it. It's specifically money not to replace existing infrastructure. It funds growth, right? Amenities needed in response to that growth. All right. And this is the important part. It's the capital cost. It's not the ongoing maintenance. This is a fee. It's a one-time fee. It doesn't pay for the ongoing maintenance. It just covers the initial capital cost for the development of the project. And what's really important, and the usefulness of having an amenity cost charges bylaw, is that it's clear, it's transparent, it's upfront. Everybody knows in advance, well in advance, what they need to pay. It's very similar to a development cost charge in that way. And we can't charge these things unless there's a clear connection, either a direct or indirect connection between the amenity demanded and the demand produced by the residents or the workers that come into the community. There needs to be some kind of a link between them. And that's what council's policies describe. Other is proportional. So we don't make any one development pay for the entirety of an amenity if it's an expensive one. Instead, the idea is to distribute that cost evenly over projects. And that's why we charge it either by square footage, or square meters in this case, or unit. And then the fee increases with the number of units or the area. Okay, so that's proportional to the impact and the demand. The other is concurrent. So we don't want to collect money and not spend it. We want to spend it on amenities that are needed. And so there's always this plan within the scope. And in this case, the plan is 10 years of build out, 10 years of potential growth, and we'll have need to build amenities within that 10-year time period. All right. Next is certainty, fairness, and transparency. This was a big push of the development industry when they were recommending changes to the legislation, is by having upfront fees that were clear to everyone rather than negotiated on a case-by-case basis, which is the current process, that it would be more certain, create fairness in the industry, and more transparency for everyone, members of the public as well as industry. Next, consider financial and market impacts. That's a fundamental requirement of either adopting a development cost charge bylaw or amenity cost charge bylaw. We need to consider the potential impact on the industry through this process. And happy to answer questions on that as we go. All right, the existing, so I'm going to describe on this slide the existing community amenity contribution policy. Very briefly, you're all quite familiar with it. Approved in 2010, it's a one-time charge on new or on newer improved amenities. It's triggered by zoning and only zoning. That's the trigger. A zoning which residential zoning, so that increases residential density and results in a lift in value. That's essentially what we're capturing now. And the important part is, so I mentioned the trigger, and then amenities are defined in policy. So the CAC policy, the Community Amenity Contribution Policy right now, has a list of amenities within it. The official community plan talks about various amenities. The neighborhood plans council has adopted over time talks about the various amenities, and also various policies of council like your transportation plans and your childcare strategy. All of those talk about amenities that are needed in the community, and those are then reflected in the annual budgets, the capital plan, and then reflected in council's CAC or Community Amenity Contribution Policy, which is currently in place. So the way it works is there's currently no statutory basis for us simply setting a mandatory fee prior to 2023, okay, when the community, the ACC bylaw powers come into place. Before that, we were really just using our general administrative powers in the negotiations. So when a developer approached us and they said, hey, I'd like to do this big residential development, and then we'd say, well, that's going to cause some impacts in the community. How can we talk about mitigating those impacts? That results in a negotiation and a proposal from the developer to mitigate those impacts. When we negotiated, we worked from the position of a pro forma evaluation, looking at 75% of the estimated lift in market value attributable to that density change. That was the measure of what we would try to negotiate towards, okay? And we were very successful with it over time. So now I'm going to talk for the next two slides about the ACC, or Amenity Cost Charges Bylaw, and I'll highlight some of the key differences as we go along. So it is recommended for approval, as I say, as soon as possible in 2025. The sooner we adopt it, the more certainty it creates in the industry and with members of the community. It's just like the previous or the current process, I should say. It's a one-time charge on newer approved amenities. A key difference here, as I mentioned very early in the first slide, is it's triggered by subdivision or building permit applications. The fee has to be paid before the subdivision is approved or the building permit application is issued if there isn't a subdivision associated with the development. So those are the two triggers. And therefore, we can capture properties that are already zoned, okay, that already have zone use. So that's the important difference. The amenities are defined in legislation quite broadly. I'll just read it because it's interesting. Amenities broadly defined as a facility or feature that provides social, cultural, recreational, or environmental benefits to a community. That's it. It's pretty broad. There's some examples given in the Act of things like, you know, a community recreation center, library, public art, public square, but these are just examples. It isn't an exhaustive list. So it's a very broad definition. So it really comes down to council, what do you feel needs to be funded in the community in order to address the amenities? And then I'll talk about certain limitations in a moment. The third point I'll make as well, so amenities defined in legislation. So the amenities are broadly defined, but they specifically exclude affordable housing. So we used to have these complex ongoing conversations about how do we accommodate housing as an amenity and then other features and libraries as an amenity, and it got quite confusing with the existing CAC policy negotiation. In the future world, and you'll see in the amenity cost charges bylaw before you tonight, there is no connection between the two directly. Okay, there isn't a direct connection. We're not collecting fees that can then fund the affordable housing reserve or affordable housing. It is strictly for the list of amenities, those physical amenities like that are found in the bylaw itself, and I'll mention those in a moment. Next is if they are flat rates, so we aren't negotiating, it's simply a flat rate, and it's based on the use, number of units, and area. Okay, so again, it's proportional to the scale of the development. It goes up with the amount of development. And an important factor here, so I mentioned this conversation tonight isn't about affordable housing. We are not blind to the need for affordable housing, however. Thankfully, the province has given us a new tool under Bill 16, and it's something called inclusionary zoning. Under the Act, it's generically referred to as Affordable and Special Needs Housing Zoning Bylaw. So it's a long term, but the province has essentially created a power separate from tonight's conversation, and we'll be coming back with separate bylaws to deal with it. So I won't go into it at great length, but I just want to assure you that staff are working on inclusionary zoning powers to come forward in a bylaw at the time that we return the zoning bylaw and official community plan conversation to you later in the fall. All right. The final point I'll make about the amenity cost charges bylaw is while it's a flat rate, with agreement with us, a developer can have a conversation with us about providing the amenity on site. So let's say we think that that site is a very useful site for providing an amenity, such as a community recreation center or some other use. The Act allows us to still have those conversations and to, by agreement, come to an understanding that the developer could provide the amenity on site, like a community rec center or library or whatever it is, childcare, and that the monetary value of the amenity cost charge would be reduced or eliminated of an equivalent value. Okay, so that's a way for council could, through the approval of the building permit, essentially negotiate, and again, this negotiation, an agreement for the amenity to be on site. It gives us that flexibility. The usefulness of it is it's only by agreement. So a developer can't say, I'm not paying money, I'm going to give you what I think you need in the location we think you need it. The developer doesn't have that choice. It's our choice through the process as to where the amenities are best located, and they are only provided by agreement. Okay. All right, so the new amenity cost charge bylaw, or ACC bylaw, continued. So there are certain legislated circumstances where ACCs are not payable, and the province has defined these in a regulation, in particular, and in the Act. And they include things like a place that is solely used for public worship. ACCs do not apply. Where there is no increase in population of residents and workers that would demand the service. And essentially, if there's no need created by the development, you can't ask for an amenity. An example of that would be, let's say somebody has a threeplex and they propose to tear that threeplex down and replace it with a threeplex that's just newer, but it's the same number of units. That would essentially be an equivalent or no increase to the residents. Okay, so you wouldn't be able to just charge somebody. Okay, so that's the idea there. Next is if it's already been charged for a particular amenity already. So let's say it's a property and we've already charged for that amenity in the past. You can't double count again, unless they're proposing even more units or even more density, and then you can charge for the equivalent value of the increase. Okay, so there's this fairness idea built into the Act.
Can you give an example of that now?
Yeah, so we do have lots of examples where a building or buildings on a site are torn down, and then a new, more dense development goes up. Let's say it goes from 100 units to 400 units. the 400 units of value, you would essentially give them credit for that in a sense. You would say, well, you're not going to double charge them for that because we've already collected amenities along the way when that was first built. That's the concept behind it. Okay. Next is units required under affordable or special needs zoning bylaws. So that inclusionary zoning, it says if we require the unit through inclusionary zoning, we can't charge an ACC for it. Okay. So that's in the circumstances where an amenity bylaw has been adopted by council. Next is by regulation. And so what the regulation says, this document, the province, essentially says, if the housing is owned, leased, and operated by government, basically the federal, provincial, regional, First Nations governments, we can't charge an ACC for it. And that's typically for social and supportive housing, including transitional housing or emergency housing. Those would be things operated, owned by government, and we wouldn't be able to charge an ACC for it under legislation, and the regulation, I should say. Or if the facility is operated by a society, health authority, charity, or nonprofit funded by government to supply housing in that case. So in circumstances where either the housing is owned and operated by government, or the government essentially has a partnering agreement to get a nonprofit or charity, health authority to run the housing on behalf of the government. So those things are all exempt from ACCs. We cannot charge it for them. And then finally, cooperative housing. We can't charge an ACC for cooperative housing. Next, ACCs that would otherwise be applicable need to be made up in other forms. So let's say we're collecting money from all these different developers, but there's some government housing in that mix, and we don't charge for that housing. And I should.
I think we missed that.
Prohibition against waiving.
Oh, no. Okay.
Nope, I haven't gotten there yet. So these are just the circumstances I'm going through.
Right.
It's lengthy. So ACC is applicable. Let's say there are, I'll just reiterate that point. We're collecting ACCs from many developers, and some of that housing is run by the government. Okay. We can't say, well, we still want that money, so we're going to take that ACC and apply it to all the other developers. We can't do that. Okay. Instead, to make up that difference of the government-funded ACC, we essentially have to use taxpayer funds to do that. Okay, to fund it. We can't use the ACC source and just distribute those costs amongst everybody else. And because it comes down to a fairness principle of the Act, it's the same with DCCs. We can't say, well, and it's just the way the province is structured, DCCs.
So it's just for that site? For that
yeah,
project.
for those affordable units, you couldn't say, well, the other developers are going to pay for those affordable units over there, right? Just as a matter of trying to balance the books. And if you need to balance the books, it needs to come from some other source, whether it's a grant, but most likely taxes. Okay. Next point is around there's a general prohibition in the Act around waiving or reducing the fees further, except by bylaw for eligible developments. So specifically, the Act states that there are two kinds of housing council can choose to waive on top of those ones that are automatically exempt. And they are not-for-profit rental housing and for-profit affordable rental housing that council defines by bylaw. So this essentially is a way for council to choose to define affordability and then to exempt ACCs for whatever that is defined as. So we've done this for quite some time for development cost charges. Council may remember the Kiwanis housing in Inland Valley. When that came forward, they were going to be charged a development cost charge, but council adopted a bylaw at that time to essentially waive that charge because that with Kiwanis was believed to be a provider that was important and needed to be funded through other means, basically the taxpayer funding to cover those costs. Essentially, the Act sets up a structure that council can define what not-for-profit rental housing is and what for-profit affordable rental housing is, and then waive that by bylaw. Either waive it or reduce it. Okay? It's optional though, it's not a requirement.
Councillors Murray and
Sure.
Councillor Back, we've just received a lot of information and maybe it is best to
Yeah, keep
check
going.
in.
Okay, happy to
Oh,
pause and read.
oh. Well, I think he's just got one more little page.
All right. Is it one page? Because this one looked like one page and it was 4.
No, I know, but
It's-
I think you're at collection and then effect on in-stream.
Yeah,
right
I
here.
guess the challenge is
that's it.
if I put down every exemption in text, we'd have 50 slides. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
So I
So
tried to
let's
cover it
just
again.
keep going.
Happy to go over it again, though, and answer any questions.
Is there just a clarification
Yes.
question from
Yes,
either?
great. Okay.
Clarification, yeah,
Just-
please.
With regards to the waiving or reducing, then does that have to be built into the bylaw then? Anything that we want to decide as a council?
That's right. So council could do what we've done in the past with DCCs, where
Yeah.
you kind of on a one-off basis.
Yeah,
The problem is that might slow down development. So council can predefine in the bylaw the types of affordable housing that you would like to waive, and then everyone will know upfront, this is the housing that would get waived. But it would have to be whatever council defines as affordable housing. So that could be housing at a certain rent level, provided to a certain income level, right? And with certain eligibility criteria for the residents. That can all be defined by bylaw. So let's say council said, well, to meet our ACC exemption, they have to be units rented at $500 a month, and they have to be only rented to seniors. Council could define that, okay, by bylaw ahead of time. Then that would be what would receive the ACC waiver, or a portion. You don't have to waive the whole thing. You can do a reduction as well. And the important point here is that that really is designed to deal with circumstances outside remember I mentioned the inclusionary zoning already? So we're going to be recommending you already are essentially setting out needs for affordability and defining that by bylaw, and those people will automatically be exempt from ACCs because they're an inclusionary zoning situation. This would only deal with situations outside of that. So they weren't already captured with inclusionary zoning. If you can think of some kind of a scenario or a situation where somebody, in some cases, developers come forward with a proposal with a nonprofit and they want to provide some affordable housing, you can then by bylaw decide if that's worthy of an ACC reduction.
so it can be done on a case-by-case basis.
It can be done case by case or defined ahead of time. The challenge is, of course, every time an ACC is reduced, that imposes a burden on the taxpayer to cover those costs. So it's useful to define inclusionary zoning in advance, and then you know the potential impact on the community over that period of time.
Mr. Downock, do you have additional comments on it?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that the bylaw as it's written right now currently exempts any class of affordable housing. So, just for council's information.
Whatever affordable housing actually is defined, which is where the problem lies.
Councillor Ma, clarifying question.
Yeah, so these are the two general prohibition, if I heard correctly. One is for non-for-profit rental housing.
So these is local government may waive or reduce an ACC for not-for-profit rental housing or for-profit affordable rental housing, and then define what affordability means and establish requirements and conditions in that bylaw, such as negotiating a housing agreement with us to guarantee that it is secured over time, for example. Those can be conditions in the bylaw.
So if this is put in place to, speed up the process by reducing the need for negotiations. The definition of affordable, if we define it as 30% below the annual median, that will change over time. And so how do you tie that into when do you count it? When the developer puts a final proposal in? Because that could be 2 years after their initial proposal and they're doing the pro forma. So it could change quite a bit for them and result in, hey, this isn't going to work for us. Or,
Sure. So in terms of the timing, we've always tried to negotiate in the current process, we've always tried to negotiate the CAC as close to the public hearing as possible and finalize that negotiation. And similarly, if there was some kind of a rate that was fluctuated over time, we would try to negotiate that as close to the issuance or approval of the subdivision or building permit at that. So let's say somebody applied for a permit, but it wasn't issued for 6 months. We would try to negotiate whatever time issue was as close to the date of issuance. Okay. I think the important point is what we're leading towards and what we're heading towards is inclusionary zoning, which is going to be, we're going to be recommending a fairly strict definition. What is affordable, exactly how much, how it escalates over time, who's it for, those types of things. Council can then weigh and balance those options and then approve a bylaw that time in the fall.
I think we should press on unless
Yeah,
it's just a clarifying question. Yes?
Just want to clarify, just for everybody in this room and anybody who's watching, what is inclusionary zoning?
Yeah, so inclusionary zoning is a general term that defines what the province calls affordable and special needs housing. And that housing is essentially up to council to define by bylaw. So the province essentially enables council to define what that means for their own community. So council will get to choose that. Okay. All right, finally, an important point, the collection, the establishment of reserves for ACCs and public reporting is all required, and it's very similar to development cost charges. There is a public transparency component to it. And then finally, there is an effect on in-stream applications. So we have a number of applications that are ongoing. These things like rezonings, development permits, and building permits were the applications that have been submitted to us. And those applications and the subsequent ACC that would otherwise be payable those applications are not impacted by the initial ACC bylaw that we're recommending. Okay, so essentially the existing system of negotiation is grandparented and continues for those existing applications. That would change for any amendments we make to this bylaw. Let's say council adopts this bylaw in the next month or so. If council adopts a new amendment to that ACC bylaw, again, all the existing building permits, development permits, and rezonings would enjoy the benefit of it not applying, but there's a 12-month window that they would need to get their building permit, or else the new rates adopted later would apply. So that's a very standard procedure for changes in DCCs as well. So it's a statutory, it's not negotiated, we just follow strictly what the Act allows for to dealing with grandparented applications.
Mr. Stewart?
Yeah. Let me try to simplify this. We have an opportunity to collect money while we're sorting all this out. If we don't do that, we don't get the money. And the second thing is it has to all be reviewed within a year. So we have a chance to change it if we don't like it. So I'm sorry, I'm being really blunt here. That's where we're at right now. That's the provincial legislation. We need to be able to collect as much money as we can in the next year while we sort all this out and all this OCP and blah, 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 blah. So we just, yeah, we need to move forward on this. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
Mr. Milburn?
So key message, David stole my thunder there a little bit. That's my final slide. So why now? So the interim housing needs report has been endorsed by council in October of last year. The OCP bylaw and zoning bylaw updates are coming, and they have to be adopted by the end of the year. And I think Mr. Stewart's point is that we will be coming back to council very soon after the new OCP and community plan and zoning bylaws adopted, because it will have a completely different set of numbers attached to it in terms of units. Okay, all the unit counts within this proposed bylaw in front of you are really based on historical information. Okay. Historical information and have a 10-year time frame attached to that. But we can't create the final version until council has established just how many units and where they will be going in the community, and that will happen this year. So we will be coming back with a new ACC amendment early in 2026 to deal with that change, okay, in the community. And again, fewer zoning bylaw amendments are anticipated in the future, and we can't capture CACs if there's no rezoning. So we need to have an ACC bylaw to do that, and we capture the contribution at subdivision or building permit. Other issues, I mentioned inclusionary zoning, and then we will be coming back with an ACC bylaw update after the OCP and zoning bylaw in early 2026. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. At this point, I've got Councilors Murray and Hanson. Councilor Murray?
So I hear Mr. Stewart, I hear you, but his was just easier to understand. So thanks very much. That was good information, but I hear you, Mr. Stewart. So we'll do this to collect that money until we can figure all this out. I liked how he put that, because I think there's lots of pros and cons to, I think there's more cons, quite frankly. You know, us deciding the future of our community, not being able to anymore because the province wants to do it for us is a big con, in my opinion. The 22,000 units, those are units of all types, multifamily, units on single-family lots, 3 units on a single-family lot, basement, suite, main, coach house. And I would just say that, you know, amenity contributions were created to be able to support. The original that we started talking about when I was first elected was, as density began to happen within the community, you know, we needed to kind of support the community and how it was changing. And so that was the amenity contribution concept. And then, you know, those amenity contributions over the years sort of, you know, evolved and morphed, and then they were being, you know, impacted for those that were coming into the community. A really good example of that would be a public art feature we had on one development that was in the center of the development. It was called public art, but in order to actually see it or enjoy it, you had to walk into somebody's private property in the courtyard of a building to actually see it, which was defeating the whole purpose of public art. So, you know, my concern with all of this, it just sounds so simple, and we've solved all the problems that we nasty little municipalities have created by driving our own future in our own direction, is that the densities in single-family neighborhoods, and certainly in the neighborhoods of this community, which was built on sprawl in the 1950s, there is going to be such a unlevel playing field, because the densities will attract more dollars versus the types of units and the needs of those outlying neighborhoods. Just the cost to be able to service those neighborhoods is going to be exorbitant. And so, you know, I'm glad we sort of stuck with those 3 units instead of the 4 to 6. But I just think, you know, the jury's out on all this. I think I think a community has to naturally evolve. And I think the local municipality is the best one to determine how it evolves. I would be interested, and I know there's some, you know, timing of this because we want to collect those dollars while we sort all of this out. But I would be interested to see some tables that show what we used to be able to negotiate with the developer. Oh, there it is. Oh,
No,
you're right.
it's
Oh,
something
nice.
else.
So I thought you were going to pull it in to me because you've already predicted my question. But I'd like to know what we used to get. Denna, I'll give you an example of Denna. We probably had secured one of the most lucrative packages in the early days of this OCP. I think it was $21 million. It was that park. It was 80 units in perpetuity of below market housing in the building. And eventually, plus there was a bunch of other things, but there was a daycare that we had a bit of a problem with, but the daycare was an intention. And then that road, the Fern Street used to go to the dog leg on Mountain Highway and went over the Fern Street overpass to the Seymour. You know, I envisioned and asked a planner, couldn't we just lift the road up and pull it over the tower and have it on the outside and pull the towers down so they weren't right on the edge of the highway? And so that's what happened. So that road got paid for. It was a benefit for the developer because they got a cul-de-sac at Hunter, but we got a road. So, you know, I would like to know what the example it will be going forward for these amenity costs, because these amenities are for the community. I always wanted them spread out more throughout the community and not so intensified. But I would like to see some tables to show what used to be and what kind of amenity dollars we're going to get under this new system. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Hanson and some of my own comments. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Milburn, for your presentation, which I found extremely clear. I understood it, contrary to Councillor Berry's point. Didn't need any further clarification. But just on the issue of, we have this letter from Forum, the student housing provider. So, and you talked about the transitional in-stream applications, and you talked about the exemptions and the fact that the ACC won't apply to housing which is determined by us to be affordable. Perhaps you could just speak about this situation addressed in the form letter and
Excellent.
how it will be dealt with.
Excellent. Yeah, happy to. I've spoken to that applicant as well as the Ryan Blades from the university today about this to discuss the process. So they're fully aware. So what we have discussed with them, and the forum has submitted an application. They haven't paid the fee yet, but they're very close. So that will be a complete application very soon. So because of that, the Act actually requires that we treat them under the old process. So the ACC bylaw wouldn't be applied, provided that they have a in-stream application at the time that this ACC bylaw is adopted. Okay, so we've advised them if they submit the application and pay the fee in short order, they will be under the negotiated CAC or community mandated contribution approach. So we'll do a pro forma analysis, we'll negotiate with them, and they feel that's fair because they feel they have a special kind of housing, purpose-built student housing. They'd like that reflected in the pro forma analysis. We understand that. They've offered to secure that through a covenant or other means, possibly a housing agreement. So that's essentially the grandparented, exactly that example of a grandparented application.
Thank you for that. And then just following up on that, what if it were grandparents? So how would these student housing units be addressed within the ACC formula?
Oh, okay, so let's say it wasn't. You're saying run that scenario through if it wasn't grandparented?
That's right. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so every development by a unit rate pays the proposed fee. And I can just show you, this is just from the actual report in front of you tonight. So they would be paying the apartment rate per unit if it was an apartment complex that they were proposing under the proposed amended cost structure bylaw.
Not per size, per unit.
Per unit, per dwelling unit for an
That's the
apartment.
problem.
That's right. And so that's very similar to how we charge for development cost charge as well on a per unit basis. And I guess we had a quick look at at Burnaby, who recently approved an ACC bylaw, and they are charging a combined rate for, I just have a laneway home example. So let's say a laneway home, they're proposing 56,000 combined fees for DCCs and ACCs, and we're proposing 34,000. So that's an example of it.
Do we have
And those numbers this is in the bylaw, and this is in your package tonight too.
fair enough with respect to the numbers? I understand the numbers, but do we have the power then to determine this to be affordable housing, for-profit affordable housing, and waive the ACC?
Yes, council would have the authority to define what for-profit affordable housing is. And if they felt because of the size of units, the type of clientele using it and so on, and that was secured in a housing agreement, for example, council could by bylaw define that as not meeting ACCs in the future. So the province essentially giving you the power to use that kind of nuance when a special or unique application comes forward. You can then define what that is. And it might, I just don't know that because so far they've said they're going to be market rates. But if there was an affordable component to it for some reason, that may justify an ACC reduction, and council to define that. But again, we don't know yet. The application isn't fully in yet. So.
Thank you.
And that would be, sorry, just to jump on that question, don't mind.
Yeah.
If there was a mix, like affordable and market.
Yeah.
Waiving could it be only applied to the?
Yes,
to be only
it could, an ACC reduction could not be applied for
Right.
market situation. And because that would be essentially assistance to business, right? So whereas the Act specifically says, despite the fact that you can't assist business, if they're delivering affordable housing as you define it, council, you can reduce the ACC for that purpose. It has a financial impact on the other end. You still need to find money to cover that from some other means, but you could provide that benefit, and you will have the power to define what affordable for-profit housing means to you.
So, just my own comments on this. I mean, the challenge with it, I like the old way. The old way
Me too.
was, we got the ability to negotiate, set priorities for our own community. And the big difference in my view on this is that when we were producing a building that was mixed between fairly premium market units and then some affordable and subsidized units in the mix. This new model actually goes so far as to protect the high-end units from subsidizing the lower end and non-market units within it. So we have to say, well, we're going to deliver this over the course of the neighborhood, and instead of us reapportioning it to the more expensive, higher-end market units, we actually aren't allowed to do that. We have to actually account for the impact, and maybe we have a reserve fund, maybe we're doing it off the levy, but we're actually protecting those premium units from paying a higher portion of the affordable and subsidized units in the project. And so what we used to do is we would take a project and we say, all right, we're going to build some premium units, but we're going to extract some higher level CACs off those higher value units, and we're going to use it to make the other units more deeply subsidized, affordable. They're going to be protected from us doing that in this process. And so I think that's a loss. That used to be a very important role that we would play, is to say, well, yeah, you want those extra 2 or 3 floors, but we know what those top 2 or 3 floors are worth, and we're going to be able to use them to get more affordability and public amenity benefit elsewhere in the building. And now those units are protected from us doing that. Do I have that right, Mr. Milburn?
I would say generally yes. What the province has said is local governments could still have those kinds of density bonusing scenarios where you give some more, but only if it's more than the 22,369. It's got to be beyond your needs as defined in your housing needs report. If it's beyond those needs, you can negotiate for that through a density bonusing scheme.
Which we're not going to achieve in the near term on most of these projects, and so.
So they have significantly limited council power. Now, the sort of flip side of that coin is council will be able to do inclusionary zoning, so that as you assign those 22,369 units, approximately 22,400, you can also say where you want inclusionary zoning, where you want affordable housing, and they must provide it. We won't issue the building permit unless that housing is provided. So there's this certainty attached to that new inclusionary zoning tool, and council can define the affordability levels, the clientele, all of that in advance. So pros and cons, but definitely power has been taken away on a case-by-case negotiation. That's correct.
I sit on finance for Metro Vancouver. Metrovan has a proposal coming forward next month, and it's about DCC waivers on affordable units. And it's interesting that the staff have been going back and forth with the different committees and back and forth, trying to figure out the best way to apply the benefit, particularly to student housing. And they've come back, and the staff recommendation is actually to only allow the benefit for student housing when it's on-campus student housing. And I went and said, what about an agreement that says it's committed to those? Nope. What about, something that's just adjacent to the community, to the campus master plan? Yeah. No. And so largely the benefit that Metro is going to pump back into student housing is really only going to be able to take advantage of by UBC and SFU, because they have lands around there, to a limited degree Kaplan OU, but Douglas, Fontland, all of the other schools are out of luck because they won't be able to put it on campus property. And I really pressed them on why, and they said that they were just very uncomfortable with what the future uses of student housing could be. And so they've decided that if it's on campus, it's reasonably protected to be student housing, and if it's off campus, its future uses are still in question, and so they weren't willing to waive the DCC off campus. Are we amenable to that kind of a question on the issue of putting affordability towards student housing? That we, the campus master plan for Kaplan University is to have 2,000 units of on-campus student housing, and we could make it so that there's a really double whammy benefit on producing those units at university, because they get waived both Metro Vancouver and our own, versus ones that are claimed to be student housing, but they're off campus and don't have a head lease from the university, which really means they're not student housing.
I would say I'm completely open to doing the analysis and to giving you advice in the future. I haven't done the same level of analysis that they've done and the potential impacts. I think the difference for us is we potentially have some viable student housing off campus that council in the past has authorized through a housing agreement. that secures that housing at a certain affordability level for certain people. And we've been comfortable doing that because we have some experience with it. So I'm not sure at this point where I'd say, well, let's throw that all the way out and just do it only on campus. I would want to do a little bit more analysis to give council some good advice about the implications of that. I mean, I'm not saying Metro Vancouver hasn't done that analysis, I just say I'm not privy to it at this point. But we will be giving advice to council this year about those topics, yes.
We'll be considering it at the finance committee next month, but I'm sure they're available to talk to you about what they considered on that. Councillor Pope, did I see your hand? Oh, Councillor Bax.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was fairly clear as well. Just wanted to talk about, wondering if you can give a little glimpse into what this new inclusionary zoning policy could look like as it compares to maybe ones that we might be familiar with. Like I think, the city of North Van for many years has had their 10-10 in perpetuity policy that's generated some below market housing, but how far can we go with this new inclusionary zoning policy to generate affordable units versus the type of CAC discussions we can have now? That how much more or less can we generate, do you think?
Yeah, and I think we'll be recommending an amount later this year. We will be testing alternatives based on historical performance. We've typically tried to aim for between 5 and 15% of units, approximately at the Metro Vancouver median rate, and then escalating over time at the rate that the market escalates, essentially. That's the kind of basic principles, 5 to 15% of the units at Metro Vancouver median rents. However, again, it depends on if council only wants to see deeply subsidized units, you'll have many fewer units.
Yeah.
Or if council's willing to accept housing that is, say, for low to moderate income earners, which is in that, Tina can remind me, the low to moderate definition for BC housing right now, it's around $86,000 to $124,000. So people that are in that income range, you will have many more affordable units, but it'll be less deeply subsidized per unit. So it depends. And we'll be coming back and giving council advice, and then you will get to choose what is the amount that you think is important to be required and mandated in inclusionary zoning. The other important point I'll mention, every key growth center will have a slightly different rate, not because, because they can afford different amounts. Basically, land is worth more in some areas, and we have to do a feasibility assessment to bring you advice. We have to actually assess what the market can bear. We do that already, right, through our CAC negotiations. We do a pro forma analysis. That's a feasibility assessment on a case-by-case basis. The province is asking us to do that on a community-wide basis and then give you advice and discuss with the community. We do know that different town centers can produce different rates of housing based on
Maplewood might have a different formula than
potentially,
Valley.
Potentially, and in fact, when we come back, we might be recommending different ACC rates as well by town center. It depends, and that's there's different affordability that can be achieved based on the value in the area. Again, that's not an obligation. The council has to approve it in that way. You could just have a sort of a flat standard across the community, but we know, based on past experience, some projects, as mentioned by Councillor Muri, can generate a lot of CAC based on the center and so on, and others not so much.
Well, could it be based too on where we want to see more affordable units?
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, but it has to be feasible.
Yeah.
There's a definition for that in the Act, and we'll be giving you professional advice on that from a land economist. Okay.
Councillor Pope.
Thank you very much for this. It's fascinating, the change, and it seems to me I support the way the government's going with this, because it's making it clearer for everybody to understand the what used to be a fairly murky process, and hopefully it will lead to more affordable housing, which raises my question about this, about the timing on this. Given that this council has made affordable housing a priority, I'm curious why we're doing the ACC bylaw first, but without the new affordable housing bylaw. At the same time, I realize it's a lot for planning to get all that done, but given one or the other, wouldn't it make sense to move forward first with the affordable housing bylaw
And then followed by
policy
ACC.
and then followed by the,
Mhm.
yeah, is there?
Yeah, so we're recommending it be done in this fashion to set expectations, understanding in the industry, to make sure that we don't leave any money on the table, as in if projects have zoning, they should pay ACCs, right, already. And so it's really to set that standard and for us to test it, to test the market viability as well, and we're learning along the way. The usefulness of the existing applications can enjoy the grandparented rates, and so we're not putting anybody out. But we are recommending coming forward as soon as possible for this because we're going to learn from it and then we're going to come back within a revised or amended bylaw based on the updated numbers of units by the end of the year. Or I should say early in 2026 because, of course, OCP and zoning will be by the end of the year.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I can certainly see how it's going to take council significant amounts of time to come up with the definition that we can all agree on as to what affordable housing is and what the range would be for subsidized housing and all of that. It's going to get very complex. I can see how that would take a lot of time. And again, I think I would still push for us having some preliminary discussions about that around this table before it comes to that.
Those discussions are starting next month. We'll have scenarios in front of council for next month, and then we'll go out to the public in the spring. And so we're starting that process. Staff are like the ducks in the water right now. They're madly producing all the various bylaws and doing the various pieces of analysis so that we can give you good information starting next month.
Sounds like you're all over it. I just noticed on the government website about this that you directed us to that it says that actually, to complicate everything, a local government may define affordable rental housing and then provide waivers and reductions of DCCs to developments that are eligible under those. So is there some interplaying with the DCCs in affordable housing as well?
Yeah, for simplicity, I would suggest that if we're going to waive one, we may want to waive the other for consistency, right? For the industry and for the public and for everybody. Again, there's just more impact in terms of how are we going to cover those DCCs as well as ACCs through other means, grants and taxes and so on. So there's an implication, and I see Rick sweat at the brow every time we talk about waivers and reductions because there's always an impact. It's not like it's free money. There's always an impact in terms of how we're going to pay for it. But I would suggest that there is certainly some benefit to mirroring DCC and ACC rules as much as possible for simplicity, consistency of bylaw application, and so on. Obviously, they're for different fees. They're for different things use the money for, right? Like what we use for DCCs and what we use them for is different than ACCs.
Yeah,
but I mean, mirror the
DCCs...
practice, mirror the approach and the standards that we use, such as whether we would waive or reduce the fee, and based on what reason.
But I thought, wasn't it clearly said previously that we cannot use any DCC's money for affordable housing?
That's right, or ACCs.
Doesn't this
Or
contradict that?
ACCs. ACCs and DCCs cannot be used for affordable housing.
Right,
Neither.
and yet the government website says we can use reductions of DCCs to developments.
Right. But you can't collect a DCC or collect the ACC and then spend that on it. The contribution essentially is provided by reducing or waiving the fee.
Okay.
So you're contributing to it in a way, but just not collecting money and then dispersing it to those projects. Okay, so there's a difference there.
Yes.
Stay on that site.
We used to collect it off of, 9 or 10 units and use it to bring one down. Now, all you can do to contribute to affordability is just waive it on the one unit, which isn't going to make the unit affordable. Maybe I'm just absolutely trying in vain to make this less of a regressive tax, but when you have a $4 million unit in the sky and you have a basic unit that just doesn't meet any of the criteria, they're largely contributing the exact same amount in this tax. And so I guess putting our thinking cap on, is there any way for us to get around that? Because I think a reasonable person goes, the premium product should be contributing more in terms of a benefit back to the community. And so it's a regressive tax because you have a smaller unit means you're paying a higher percentage back into this tax. So Could we? I think Councillor Back started exploring the question of specific ACCs for specific neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Could we have an ACC that applies below 6 stories and an ACC that applies above 6 stories? Can you separate a building and so that you have a premium standard for a premium product?
Or you could, for example, let's say, council knows how many units, you've allocated them. We come back with advice. At that point in early 2026, we could say, well, it's per unit for a unit up to this size. And if the unit's bigger than that, it's this other rate. You could do that. It's got to be somehow linked, though, to the attributable nature of it. So does that bigger unit mean that there's more people that generate more demand for those amenities? You'd have to make that argument. So you can't necessarily link it to wealth. You have to link it to demand for the service. So if you can justify it from that perspective, that could make sense. For example, when you have multiple bedrooms and washrooms, you potentially have a bigger family that can accommodate, and therefore there's potentially a justification that you'll have more people demanding more service, but you'd have to tie it to that demand.
Yeah, I find it frustrating that we're going to be, let's say, above the tree line, you're going to be doing a unit for sale, $1,500 bucks a square foot, up to $2,000 bucks a square foot in the current market. For rent, you're going to be $5.50 per square foot for rent. Like, they're ridiculous amounts of money. So a 1,000 square foot unit under that would be $5,500 a month, or a 1,000 square foot unit for sale would be $1.5 to $2 million for sale. And so then, there's got to be a way to pump more of that support back in. It was explicit and easy under the old system. Now I think we're going to have to create a fairly confusing bureaucracy in order to be able to turn this from a regressive tax into something that's more equitable.
Well, and the other, I mentioned one option, having different rate for size of unit. The other is what we suggested we want to explore and to discuss with council in the fall, which is by center. So some centers can just generate more revenue by the nature of the fact they attract more investment. Okay, there's more people wanting to go in that location, they'll pay more for it. So it's in a feasibility analysis, potentially you can collect more in that neighborhood versus another neighborhood, or I should say growth center, because we're talking about the key growth centers. So that would be one of the options that we will explore with you, which I think kind of captures a little bit of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say, eat the rich, go after everything you can on all of these kinds of things. I'm just trying to say that a reasonable person looking at it would see that it's not fair that the same tax is applied to a tiny, modest starter unit as it is to a premium luxury unit.
But at the end of the day, if it's the same number of people demanding the same amount of service, it's the same rate.
Mr. Stewart, do you have additional comments on the matter?
Yeah, we've gone really down a rabbit hole on this. I have to say this, where we're at right now is we have to get a system in place that allows us to continue to collect some revenue from development. It's that simple. And we get to, at some point in the not too distant future, actually review that. But all these are really relevant questions and really relevant concerns. But this province enacted legislation without, in my opinion, good thought. And we're all having to react to it and deal with it. And so that's where we're at right now. And I just want to be really clear about this. Either we collect it or we don't. And in that case, development is not paying for development at the end of the day. And I really, I can't support that. We've had a history of ensuring that development pays for development. And I don't think we should deviate from that. And notwithstanding the contrariness of the provincial legislation, we need to move ahead and make sure that we're collecting for our community, our residents, the costs of development, and then we can clean this up on aisle 3, maybe next year at the end of the day.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think what I'm pursuing is trying to figure out not just does development pay for development, growth pay for growth, but also does premium product contribute in a
Fair way.
an equitable way.
Yeah.
I know they pay more in taxes, but it just seems like the way they set this up is entirely regressive thing. I cut you off, Councillor Pope. I'm terribly sorry. Please come back to you, please.
Thank you. I just picking up on what's just been said, I just like to say that I think that and I've said this before, that we haven't been doing a good enough job for whatever reasons, of providing affordable housing in our community, similar to many other communities. And so, you know, I don't know where the fault is or whatever it is, but it hasn't been working. And so this is a new process, which I feel positive about. And I think it is going to make things simpler, clearer, and better for our community. I just wanted to pick up on one other thing that was on the website, which said that you didn't mention, is local governments may collect cash in lieu of the affordable units and may allow for the affordable units to be provided on another site. It's kind of interesting.
So that question has to do with the nuance with inclusionary zoning. So we're talking a little bit about inclusionary zoning tonight because is a future conversation.
Yeah.
So I won't get into too much detail, but essentially when council does debate inclusionary zoning, you'll be able to talk about those kind of trade-offs, where you could either accept cash or accept units on a separate site in lieu of the inclusionary zoning on the site, if you chose.
Okay, interesting. Lots of options.
Yeah.
So I should say, just to get the ball rolling on getting your opinion on this, I will be generally supportive of putting a system in. That doesn't mean I'm not reserving the right to propose some tweaks in the long run. Councilor Miri, your comments.
So just on that slide up there, our community amenity charges that we have, if somebody was to come in and tear an old rancher down and build a single family house with a basement suite and add a coach house in the back, would a community amenity charge be attached to that?
If there was a rezoning attached to it that increased density, and we've typically been applying it to multifamily projects.
Yeah, but not generally a single family.
It's almost
On a
never
CAC,
happens.
on a
It's
CAC.
very rare.
Right.
The average circumstance of where we create a new single family lot, like through subdivision,
Yeah,
is only half a dozen a year,
Right.
if that.
okay,
So
so,
it's a very rare, so this really is capturing a different kind of development.
so the amenity cost charge
Yeah.
under the single family, when this is in place,
Mhm.
you'll be coming in, you'll get that rancher, you'll tear it down, you'll build a basement suite and a
Mhm.
2-story with full height ceilings, and you'll pay $41,358.
No, because remember I mentioned that principle that if you tear something down and you're not
It's
increasing
existing, so you're
it's
not having to do it
existing,
again.
that's
So
right.
if it was new
But if it's, what we're
lots.
suggesting is the coach house, like let's say there wasn't a coach house
Living
before and they're adding a coach house, we're suggesting that that's creating a level of density that triggers a need for some contribution to the amenities
Right,
for the community that they'll enjoy. The new occupants of that coach house will enjoy the benefit of those.
so you've
amenities.
put that up just to capture subdivided, no, with like the 41,000, that is subdivided. I think we had a
Oh,
couple,
yeah.
we had a couple on Ann McDonald Way.
Yeah, we've had a couple examples where we have these subdivision proposals come in. Let's say it's a big lot, great
Right,
big lot, and they want to subdivide 6 new lots out of it.
right,
That would be an example where we
Right.
would capture it from those 6 new lots, say, going into that large.
right. And that will probably happen not as.
Very, very rarely.
Rarely.
We have very few such lots left.
So I would just go back to say that basement suites, when we allowed them, we were one of the first municipalities in the region that allowed basement suites, legalized basement suites as a form of affordable housing. And then coach houses, again, we've been trying to push coach houses as a form of affordable housing. And, I'm all for paying for development. I don't think it has up to this point. And I think those top floors of those towers have been the gravy in what we've done. I think we made big mistakes when we said we were going to allow rentals out of apartments that we're building, no restrictions on rentals, because that turned them into glorified investment opportunities. And the price rose, in my opinion, because of those abilities to allow those investment units to turn a profit in Airbnb units. But adding 20 grand to a coach house, which is already costing minimum $650,000 to $700,000, $800,000 in this community. Well, it's not affordable housing anyway. It would be multi-generational housing for families. But you gotta ask yourself, and I think the mayor, he's been speaking about this tonight, that is this more about protecting the applicant's affordability? Or is it about really trying to create affordable housing? Because I agree with Councillor Cope. We failed at affordable housing, and the few properties that we get to somehow beg the province to build some sort of below market housing at a level of $120,000 or $110,000 to support that level. I don't really know why we're doing that. I think we need to build more truly, low income housing, because that's what we're in such desperate need of. And it just seems to be, again, not the priority in any of this. So I appreciate the old way much better than I appreciate this way. I do not think this is it may achieve fairness for the applicants, but this is not going to address the issues of true affordable housing in these communities.
Mr. Miller.
Sure, I'll just mention we've gone over at length the various affordable housing options that are automatically exempt, right, through the provincial legislation and so on. So there's certain kinds of affordable housing that would be exempt. What we've tried to do is focus on attribution. So if a coach house is going to create a demand for more services, then it should be paying its fair share. And if it's not, that essentially means the rest of the community is funding that coach house. It's in essence. And one of the challenges in planning is we try to take away incentives to sprawl and try to encourage and make sure everybody pays their fair share.
And this legislation has done the exact opposite. Let's exacerbate.
And we don't want to, though, exacerbate any kind of sprawling situation. We want to make sure everybody pays their fair share and that you encourage development in areas where it makes most sense and has the least impact on the community, which is our key growth centers. Yeah.
Councillor Mo.
A lot of information. Thank you, and good discussion. I appreciate it from my fellow councillors. The way I see it is we're required by the provincial government to move away from the negotiated CAC model towards a fixed rate ACC. And there are a lot of exemptions. So, in response to Mayor Little, I do support the proposed ACC framework because we need to capture as much reasonable cost from developers now. But at the same time, we need to protect our taxpayers because someone has to pay for the amenities and the new infrastructure. Then, as Dave Stewart said, we have a year to tweak it. So it's not a perfect scenario because there's a lot of unknown factors, but it seems like the best approach now from which to move forward. So
thank you.
That's right.
Hey, along the same lines as Councillor Mott, I recognize that this is not something that we can choose not to adopt, and we have to move in this direction. And ACC bylaws what we need to go towards. And there are more opportunities to, look at case by case basis than I thought initially. And I don't think any of us really know how it's going to play out. So for that reason, I appreciate that there's urgency and I support seeing this move forward.
Checking on the timeline with you, Mr. Milburn. Is it the 4th of February that you're anticipating bringing this back to a regular meeting?
I believe we're looking at the regular council meeting of February 3rd, Monday, February 3rd.
Okay, I think we got a good go around of this, and noting the time, I'd like to move on to the other business.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next discussion up is short-term rentals regulatory framework. Just a history, obviously, we had started a process where we were bringing in regulations on short-term rentals in the community. We got to the 11th hour, and then the province did a wholesale change in the legislation, and we had to decide to sort of stop and decide whether we wanted to move more in compliance with the provincial regulation or do sort of a custom-made, made in North Vancouver kind of option out there. And so we kind of did an all-stop, and staff has been working on bringing this back for our consideration. That's tonight's presentation. Mr. Stewart, additional comments while Ms. Atha is getting ready here?
Yeah, just while they're getting ready, the province has initiated additional conditions. So hopefully staff can reflect that in their agreement. And that was actually today.
Yeah.
Fresh news on a busy news day. There you go, Ms. Atha.
Great, thanks so much, Your Worship. Good evening, members of council, community members who are here today. Thank you for coming and giving time for the short-term rentals discussion. This report and discussion tonight is actually is a framework to regulate short-term rentals in the district. This is coming back from council's meeting last March. Hard to believe it's been that long already. But council at that time directed staff to go back and look at the province's principal residency requirement, and which essentially allowed vacant secondary suites or vacant coach houses to be used for a short-term rental. So in a few minutes, Holly Adams, one of our planners, will provide an overview of the two options and how the principal residency is proposed to be applied in each. We know that although short-term rentals are not regulated right now in the district, that they have been operating for some time. And it actually was back in 2017 when council first determined that there should be a regulated approach for the district and that this was important. Council has also expressed a desire for a balanced approach that would consider protecting housing for long-term rental, but also accommodating short-term rentals. The two options in the report both respond and respect the province's requirements and both present a balanced way forward with different pros and cons. With your worship's permission, I'd like to turn it over to Holly Adams, who will walk through the presentation.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So as Tina mentioned, my name is Holly and I'm a community planner with the district. So I'm here this evening to present two approaches regulating short-term rentals as mentioned in the district and to seek council input on their preferred approach. So short-term rental bylaws were presented to council last year at the March 4th regular meeting, as most people might remember, and the proposed bylaw amendments brought forward an approach where short-term rentals would not have been permitted in vacant secondary suites and coach houses. So arising out of that discussion, council directed staff to prepare an approach reflective of the province's minimum requirement, which does permit rental of those units with some limitation. And council also requested more information on the anticipated impacts of short-term rentals in the community, along with a scan of other municipalities' approaches. So tonight I'll compare both options, go over some of the research done by staff and an implementation strategy should council adopt bylaws in the future. This should take probably about 8 minutes here. So quick reminder, before getting started, the province considers short-term rentals to be accommodations provided to the public in a host property in exchange for money. So they're generally for tourists, and they may be advertised via platforms such as Airbnb or Vrbo. They can be found in single-family properties or multi-family properties. As we can see from the map, short-term rentals have been operating all across the district for many years in an unregulated fashion, and they exist in about 3% of our total housing units. Currently, there's over 900 short-term rentals, of which the majority are located within single-family homes rather than a multi-family unit, so like a condo building. We also know most listings are for an entire dwelling unit rather than a room within a home, like you would see with a traditional bed and breakfast. So far, the district has been responding to short-term rentals on a complaints basis, but council has given previous direction to move forward with creating a regulatory approach. So in October 2023, the province enacted the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act, which stemmed from the Provincial Homes for People Action Plan. So any regulations we might bring in now have to comply with this act. The overall goal here is to improve housing supply in the province. And specifically, the Act aims to do this through these three key areas. So returning the existing short-term rentals to the long-term rental market, strengthening local government tools. So importantly, introducing or including requiring platforms. So that would again be like Airbnb to share their data with local governments through a new online platform. And then third, the province will now also have a role in overseeing short-term rentals. So one key point here is the creation of a provincial registry, and it was just announced today to be active May 1st, after which all short-term rentals will need that provincial registration number to operate. So it won't be possible to get that registration number without a valid district business license, meaning we'll likely see a large kind of influx of inquiries and questions coming in soon. Also, there's a new provincial enforcement and compliance unit that's now in place. So coming out of that March 4th council meeting, staff conducted research on the anticipated impacts of regulating short-term rentals and updated a municipal scan. So that research is found in the report attachments. I won't go over the municipal scan, it's really detailed, but staff are happy to answer any questions about it. And there are many benefits to regulating short-term rentals, so it would authorize them as a permitted use. We can better manage nuisance issues through ensuring each operation goes through the proper checks and balances when they're going through their business license process. We can better protect their long-term rental housing supply, and recognizing having some short-term rentals does support tourism through offering alternate accommodation and in turn our tourism economy. And short-term rentals are an opportunity for owners and tenants to make supplementary income. And short-term rentals also provide revenue to the district through business licensing fees and through municipal and regional district tax.
Can I just jump in there?
Yes.
Just a reminder, the intent is that we would then collect those fees and fund affordable housing online platforms, just to remind the council. And the sooner we have a licensing system, the sooner we get that money to work.
What's the magnitude of the fees contemplated from this kind of?
The recent estimates with the regulations in place, range of 250,000 per year. Rough estimate.
That'll buy a door.
All right, two. Holly,
Okay.
sorry, back to Ms. Adams.
Continue on here, yeah, thank you. So just a reminder of what principal residence means. Very simply put, it's just a place where someone lives most of the time, conducts their daily affairs, and you can't have more than one principal residence. So it's a usual place that you live. So staff are presenting two options for regulating short-term rentals. This is option one, so an occupied principal residence only. It requires that any unit with a short-term rental must be occupied by either the owner or tenant. So in other words, a principal resident must live in the unit. And vacant accessory dwelling units would not be permitted to have short-term rentals. So on the left, that's showing the vacant secondary suite not being eligible. And on the right, since it's occupied, it would be eligible with the owner's permission, of course. And this represents a higher standard of regulations than the provincial requirements. And it's the option which was presented in March. And I split the two slides. You might just notice that on the printout, slightly different. And so this is option two. So principal residence plus vacant secondary suite. So this aligns with the province's minimal standards. So the difference here, the key difference, is that you can short-term rent up to one vacant accessory dwelling unit. So the properties host principal residence plus one accessory dwelling unit, which does not have to be anyone's principal residence. So this is showing that vacant secondary suite as being eligible. So despite that key difference, in both options, you can only have up to 2 licenses for single-family property. That aligns with provincial legislation, as well, only one of which may be an accessory dwelling unit. So under both options, it's the same. You would not be able to have both a coach house and a secondary suite be short-term rentals. It's just that main unit plus one, if in the case where there's 3 on a property. So short-term rentals would also be permitted in multifamily buildings. So each unit could be eligible as long as it's someone's principal residence. And staff are not proposing like particular restrictions for multifamily buildings such as license caps. So typically the building strata would be putting those types of rules in, and the permission from strata would also be required to have a short-term rental. That's the common approach across municipalities.
Holly, can I just ask, I want to make sure they're little. This has been an issue of we know clarity is most important for council. And so I just think it might be useful just to pause. I know I've had questions from council members.
Sure, yeah, I can answer.
If any had any questions, your worship, just because some confusion has resulted from this conversation in the past. I want to be totally clear with council.
I only see 2 slides left and they look like summary and next steps. Maybe let's hit those and then do that, yeah.
Sure, yeah, and I can also bring back the other slide too.
The pictures.
Yeah, it helps to see. So, yep, coming out of that council meeting, staff completed a comparative review of the 2 options. So option 1, that was again, the occupied principal residence only. It focuses or prioritizes retaining rental housing as it leaves accessory dwelling units available for possible long-term rentals. And it may support better neighborhood outcomes in terms of, possibly less complaints, enforcement efforts, and better social connectedness. As in general, it's expected to see less licenses under this option. Whereas option 2, so that was principal residence plus vacant secondary unit, may have the benefit of providing more flexibility and potential income for owners and tenants. And short-term rentals are often more financially lucrative, depending how often they're rented out. And so both options would support tourism by providing alternate accommodation options beyond just hotels and motels. Okay, so again, staff are here to receive input from council on the preferred option. If directed to proceed, staff would bring forward a suite of bylaws reflecting that preferred approach. 4 separate bylaws are required to be amended, and so those will be brought forward as a package to a regular council meeting, just like we did in March. And so amendments to the zoning bylaw, business license bylaw, fee and charges bylaw, and bylaw notice enforcement bylaw would all come together. And then if proceeding past then, the zoning bylaw would require a public hearing and a business license bylaw public meeting. So should regulations be adopted, implementation would be rolled out in phases. This would get operators opportunity to learn about the new regulations, actually make their application and bring their units up to compliance where needed. Okay. And just to recap, so staff are seeking direction on the preferred regulatory approach. Staff have heard from council that implementation and enforcement approach is important. So staff are proposing, again, the 2-phase approach, first raising awareness during the first phase, then moving into the second phase as expected operators would be licensed and mandatory compliance and enforcement would be in place. I know we just found out today that May 1st, the province will be launching their registry. So there's a bit, it's good if we get regulations in place. And enforcement would be joint handled by the district and the provincial compliance and enforcement unit, with the province enforcing its own legislation. And there's another conversation tonight about long-term rental business licensing, and rolling out business licensing for short-term rentals could be timed with that to take advantage of a joint communications strategy and campaign in the community. So thank you. Looking forward to hearing council's feedback. So staff can return with bylaws, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stewart, you had some additional comments?
Yeah, I guess this really comes down to what kind of community you want. And is it all about short-term rentals, or is it about something else? And that's the real struggle for council right now, because there's economic benefit, of course, to those that are doing short-term rentals, but it's also denying opportunities for long-term rentals. So I just really, in terms of framing this, we just need to decide what community we want to have. I can't define any different than that.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I've got councillors Ma, Hanson, Muri, and Back, and Pope. Councillor Ma, please.
Holly, thank you for that. And Tina, I just want to start with a couple of questions. For the short-term rentals, the limit is 28 days. To me, it seems more reasonable to maybe make it 31 days, which is equivalent to the longest one. Help me to understand the reason behind 28 days.
So that is really because it aligns with the other existing uses in the zoning bylaws, such as bed and breakfast, which as they're actually considered a form of short-term rental by the province. So it would just allow our own regulations to be aligned. The province uses a 90-day definition. So municipalities are sort of split in half, whether they're around the 30 days or they've gone with the 90 days. But for us, it's staff are proposing it makes sense to just keep it aligned with the other existing uses in the zoning bylaw.
But there's no reason that it has to be 28 days.
It does not have to be. That's right.
It seems to be between 90 and 28, somewhere in between. Okay. The announcement today by the provincial government about the registry is interesting. Good timing for us, I guess. My question, there are people that are currently engaged in short-term rental activity now. What do we say to those people? Like, what happens between now and the registry and all this framework getting in place?
Yeah, obviously it's helpful if we can try to get regulations in place. We can help individuals understand if they contact staff. I think we would continue to respond to complaints as usual, like as our usual approach, but not actively enforcing ourselves. It doesn't sound like we have much of a choice with the province moving ahead.
Right, because at the same time, we still get the, MRTB, or, yeah, so we're still getting that from technically non-sanctioned activity, right? Okay. And just in terms of talking about the government's role, I get the provincial registry. I was just wondering about this CEU, the Compliance Enforcement Unit.
Mhm.
So this is a pet peeve with me about violations by the provincial government. If there are penalties for violations, who gets the funds? Provincial government, or does it flow through to the municipalities?
Well, my understanding is that if it's a provincial legislation or infraction, then and I'm actually not sure what fines they're charging, if they've announced that or not, then the province would be collecting that. And then we would be collecting when it's our own bylaws infraction.
Yeah, if you can maybe look into that, because we don't want to be hitting people, well, they're not following rules, they should be paying a fine, but it'd be nice to get that revenue. Okay.
Anyone else?
I have some additional comments from Neonella as well. Neonella, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm gonna
Thank
ask you
you,
to be
Mr.
nice and loud, very loud, and you're
Let
coming
me-
very soft in there. Thank you.
Let me see if that's better.
That's much better. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks, Mayor Little. Councillor Ma, I just heard you mention around the MRD, a question around the MRDT, and I just wanted to provide this information to council that we do continue to collect the online accommodation provider revenue from portion from the hotel tax or the MRDT. However, not being part of the data sharing with the province right now has resulted in a substantial reduction in the MRDT OAP revenue, which we had repurposed to affordable housing. I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'll come back after with my my views on which option.
If, Mayor Little, if I might add a couple comments there, as Holly was saying, that we would establish fines in our bylaw notice enforcement bylaw. Previous bylaws that were brought to council identified what an offense would be. It's around $300 to $500. There is training that was also announced today, or staff training for municipal staff as part of the province's launch today of applications that can come into the registry, or the registry is now open, is how they word it. So we will learn more about other fines that it may have. But we have a data sharing agreement draft that has been presented to us. We can't enter it until we have regulations, but we've been able to look at that agreement and understand what information would come to us and what obligations we would have.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, I believe I've got Councillors Hanson, Murray, Back, and Pope. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to staff for the presentation. Of course, this is a matter that we've talked about a fair bit. We've had another workshop. We had a council meeting where we actually voted on a proposal. Then, of course, there was a public hearing where we received some interesting feedback. And then, of course, the provincial government has brought in legislation and issued a direction which is meaningful as well. I favor option 2, but with an amendment, which is that you could rent out the main house, your principal residence when you're not there, or a vacant secondary suite or coach house. You couldn't do both, so you can't. In my view, we should do option 2, but without the right to rent out the vacant basement suite at the same time as you're renting out your principal residence when you're on vacation. So it would limit it to one short-term rental per house. I'm sensitive to the voice that I've heard. We heard it in the public hearing. We've heard it more recently in feedback to council of people who have the need to house out-of-town relatives in what they need to be a vacant basement suite. If they rent out their basement suite for long-term rentals, they don't have a place to accommodate often grandparents, but other relatives that they want to accommodate on an intermittent basis. And if in fact we prohibit short-term rentals from these units, the net effect will be that they sit empty when the relatives are not visiting. And we're not really providing a social good. I'm also sensitive to the fact, in my view, it's just a value judgment. I think allowing the renting of an empty secondary suite or coaches, it just strikes the right balance in terms of preservation of housing, but also making suites available for short-term rental. I'm sensitive to the economic benefit of short-term rental. I have children who can't afford anywhere to live, but they also work in hospitality. We're not really doing them a favor if we take away their job when we've already taken away their access to housing. So it is important that we continue to keep an eye on the economy and making sure that we have a tourist economy and we have our bars and restaurants and all that stuff, tourist amenities and all those other things operating in our community, because that provides employment to youth who are facing, as they say, enough challenges. I'm comfortable with the 28 days, comfortable with the definition of principal residence, and those are my comments.
If I may respond to one item in there, I just wanted to note that the proposal to have the cap of 1 per property is what the District of West Van has very recently brought in.
Yeah, thank you. And I actually meant to, that was, when I collected my thoughts on this, I had that, but I forgot to mention. The advantage of the idea of putting forward would be create consistency as against the District of North Vancouver, the District of West Vancouver. And when the City of North Vancouver weighs in, they may be in alignment with that as well.
We call that 2A.
Anyway,
I'll just quickly, if I may clarify as well, the City of North Vancouver is just following the province's approach, so that's what they've brought in.
Which is option 2.
That's correct.
Right.
in the report, it said that they were further considering it, or?
Not the City of North Van as far as I know.
Okay.
But the District of West Van very recently just brought
Yeah,
theirs
my mistake.
in November.
Option 2 for the District of West Van.
They're capping it to 1
Oh,
per
right.
single family property, but it doesn't matter which unit, and it could be vacant. But you would only end up with 1 short-term rental on a single family property.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Next, I have Councillor Murray.
Yeah, I lean towards option 2 as well. Interesting to know what the net loss of hotel units are. We've just made a decision recently where we're gonna tear down some hotels on Capilano Road, and it's no net gain in units, it's the same number. And here we're hosting like FIFA, and we're hosting the Invictus Games. You know, we're trying to attract these big events like this Taylor Swift, you know, event. You know, you got to ask yourself, where are these people going to stay? Like, you can't have it both ways. You got to provide accommodation in some form. And, you know, every time we turn around, we see another hotel go down. And those hotels are, you know, the older ones obviously are being torn down. But not everybody can afford $500 a night, you know, at a hotel downtown. I mean, even, you know, local, you know, chains that are in our community and stuff, they're no bargain. They can be expensive for a family of 4. And we just don't have enough of them. We used to have many more hotels on the North Shore. We lost the Park Royal Hotel. You know, really, the Key's been around forever. And then we replaced the Coach House, which was a hotel, with another hotel. So it's not like some big, huge gain in accommodation has been created, except when we decided that we were going to rent out apartments in multifamily buildings, that many of them turned into Airbnbs. And, you know, the assessments rose, not just because of that, but for a whole bunch of other reasons. The BC assessment said they wouldn't increase those assessments, and then they did. And then we find ourselves sort of in a rock and hard place, wanting to protect the you know, those secondary suites that were created for pure affordability and opportunities for revenue generation. That's why the district had approved and created legal suites years ago, 30 years ago, because we wanted to have protection over those units, and we wanted to make sure they were up to code. But we also wanted to create those revenue generators. And, you know, then now you look forward at some of these houses that are being built with suites, and it's no longer really about revenue generation or mortgage helpers. It's about, you know, opportunities to have family live with you, or create an opportunity to have a business. But I you know, for every action, there's a reaction, and we do one thing and then something else happens. So I do lean to option 2. I think that's the middle ground, and I think it gives a little bit to everybody, protects the tourism, protects the ability for us to have some accommodation in our communities that are so, you know, well used, but also allows secondary suites to also exist for people that need it and when they go away. The other one is, of course, the film industry, although they're struggling a bit right now with what's going on with production companies moving to Europe, because the incentives are just so huge that they can't pass that up. But certainly the Airbnb community was very supportive to this film industry for many years. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, did you have additional comments on the matter?
Yeah, we're not tearing down hotels. The market is finding them unproductive. But I want to be really clear that the district is not tearing down hotels.
Well, we made a decision, Mr. Stewart, to rezone hotels. And, you know, we have to, you know, in my opinion, you have to balance the loss of accommodation with this discussion. So that was my point.
Yeah, so I just
Thank you.
disagree. I disagree with you.
I understand. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the point Mr. Stewart's making is that if we didn't rezone those properties, then, and the financial incentive isn't there, they would just deteriorate and deteriorate and deteriorate, and so you would have the net loss anyway.
Well, they've been deteriorating for a long time, but they've still been standing and they've still been operating.
I've got, sorry, Councillor Mary, you're complete with your done?
I'm done. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Back, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Little. Thank you very much for the presentation. This is, as Councillor Hanson has said, a topic that we've been wrestling with for quite some time, and I want to thank staff for the work that they put into this and trying to align with the provincial legislation requirements around short-term rentals. I think option 2 is my preference. I think it strikes the right balance for all the reasons that have been mentioned. You know, tourism is a really valuable industry here on the North Shore. We have so many businesses that benefit from the tourism that we see, and there is absolutely a lack of hotels, as has been highlighted. So for that reason, I think there is definitely a place for short-term rentals. As well, I certainly heard from the public, and most recently some of the emails we received from people that want that flexibility to be able to host families or host family in a secondary suite that they may have, and the flexibility to do some short-term rentals as well is desired. So yeah, overall I support option 2, and I do support Councillor Hanson's suggestion that we limit it to 1, so that it's not the entire house, main part of the house and a secondary suite that would be rented out at one time, but one or the other. Overall I support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Councillor Pope.
Thank you very much. And thank you for once again giving us the detailed explanations of the different options. I also support option 2. I'll be honest, at the last round, I was more in favor of going with the tougher requirements and restrictions, which was option 1 at the time. And but I am listening to many of the people who have contacted me and written the mayor and council to say that, you know, a lot of people in North Van have like an extra suite, and they've been using it for family, and they've been using it for in between for short-term rentals to help pay their mortgage and whatever. And I don't want to be the one to take that away. And I also am very cognizant of the lack of hotel rooms that we have. And we need to be able to ensure that people are working in the tourism business and visiting North Van and able to stay here and contribute to the economy here that way. So I totally support Councillor Hanson's amendment as well to limit the policy to one. I think that strikes a nice balance between option one and option two. So my comments.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just my own comments on it. I'm in a similar place. So I think that when this matter comes back for discussion with the council, it sounds like maybe we can put those up as the options to sort of debate in public before we go further with the matter. But I haven't heard anyone say option one is their first choice yet at this point. So I would recommend that those are sort of the places where we have that public debate before we pass it into law. But at this point, I'm amenable to Councillor Hanson's amendment as well as the option two. Councillor.
I'm so sorry, I forgot another comment that I wanted to make,
Sure.
which pertains to the timeline. So for a couple of reasons, I think that we could potentially speed up this timeline. I know that phase one is all about educating the public and this and that and the other. And I really feel like the provincial government has done the heavy lifting in terms of communication on short-term rentals up to and including today with their announcement of the registry, which, by the way, for anyone listening, is live right now online. You actually can go on and register today. And there's an incentive to do so for homeowners. I think the public has a large, significant awareness of the fact that these laws have changed and are changing with the big announcement they made last year as well, that this was coming. And I don't think we need to repeat all that ground. It's worth reminding. I mean, as a former communications specialist, I get that people need to be reminded and told again when big change is happening. But in this case, I feel like most of those big changes people are already aware of. So I think we could potentially reduce our timeline in half here, so that we're like 6 months communications and engagements, and then 6 months from now be into the bylaw implementation phase. And that's my suggestion.
Mr. Milburn, additional comments?
Just want to make the point that I think if council were to approve a statutory regime with a business license model before May 1st, everybody's going to be rushing in to get their registry from the province by May 1st, and they'll probably then apply for our business license at the same time. So I think we recognize that there's some incentives out there for folks to apply, in the spring. And they would certainly apply for a business license from us too, so that they would comply with the merger rules, right? Because they need to get a business license locally. So we know we have to do. We know we're going to have to adapt to that schedule too, and people's desires to get a license.
Councillor Forbes.
Oh, thank you. Just to get into a little bit of detail first, we keep talking about enforcement here, enforcement efforts. And I really always say that there's no point in having anything in place unless you have proper enforcement. So my question is, what kind of enforcement? Because there's still going to be people that won't register, will do it on the QT. So I'm not saying I want everybody to be caught, but I mean, and then how do you know it stays up to the code later?
Well, with the registry, that will really help. So basically you won't even be able to post your listing to Airbnb unless you have that registration number displayed. And you can't get that without a business license. So basically, any listing that doesn't have that valid registration just will not even be able to be online, is the province's intent. So I think we're getting a huge help from the province with our enforcement. And as well, if there's situations where maybe there's an unregistered secondary suite and somebody is able to and wants to have a license over that suite, and then we would work with them to make sure that everything's brought up to compliance. As well, you might remember from last March, we were proposing to introduce a suite of safety standards for both bed and breakfast and short-term rentals. So things like fire extinguishers and evacuation plan, information like that. So that'll help ensure safety as well.
We're gonna depend on whoever has the suite to look at that and follow those rules, like, especially when we have so many that are already, suites that are already out there. I mean, there are unsafe suites in the district. There are unsafe suites everywhere. So how do we get a handle on that, that they can't get licensed and all of this extra stuff until we confirm that the suite is up to code?
Might look for some assistance from someone else.
So having a licensing system allows us to trigger a compliance conversation with the applicant. So we can look at it and say, oh, have we ever even heard of this suite before? Have we ever inspected it or looked at it? I would remind council though, we've been through a model of historically where it's non-compliant suites have built over time, and we've tried to go through a process of bringing them in. We capture most new suites now, right? Because they go through a building permit process and they show us to be in the basement. It's been allowed for years, and most projects, about 75% of all new tear downs and rebuilds have a suite, right? That's the proposal. So we are capturing it over time, and having a regulatory license system means we'll capture more of it, even more of it over time to bring up to
But I'm not
safety
concerned
standards.
about the new ones, I'm concerned about the older ones.
That's right.
the ones I'm concerned about.
And the fact that they'll need to get a provincial registry and they'll need a business license from us, and our business licensing staff will look at it and ask those questions. Does it have appropriate safety measures in place for the tenants? It's a much better situation than we have now, where we don't even regulate the short-term rentals, we respond.
I don't argue that, I just wondered if suites we didn't know about before, some of them are still gonna remain suites we don't know about.
It is possible people will lie to us and hide from us. The point of the provincial process is, though, to try to capture those, because they'll be looking at all the advertisements online and they'll be capturing that. Whereas before, every local government had to do that research themselves individually, and it was expensive and difficult. Now there'll be this kind of centralized enforcement process that, as Holly says, we'll be able to benefit from. So the future world, from a safety perspective that you're talking about, looks much better and easier to enforce than the existing situation.
Can I just add one additional thing? I understand that in linking the registry to the Airbnb site or whatever other site there is, that on the site they have to post the registry number as well, so,
Sorry, can I just, Mr. Stewart has his hand raised. Do you have additional comments, Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, just the registry will be helpful, but it's not a solution.
That's what I'm.
That's, to be very honest, we're always going to have illegal Airbnb sites in the district, and we'll have to deal with them. And the registry is helpful, but these are always going to be persistent in the municipality. I just don't want to disabuse you of that. That's the reality worldwide. So.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And we're dealing with are we going to be looking at the fines, what amount of fines for non-compliance? That's going to be brought back to council?
That's correct, yes. I'm proposing so far the same as March, so between $300 and $500 per infraction, which aligns with other similar.
per infraction meaning per day of operation, or?
It could be, yes. I think our staff always looks though to try to work with the operator and avoid fining, but.
And if I might add to the there were a number of infractions set out in that draft bylaw from last year, which said if you have a short-term rental in a spot where you're not supposed to have it, you have more guests than are permitted, you don't provide parking, there's a whole list of potential infractions.
I might have just missed that. What was the infraction value?
Between $300 and $500, depending on which one.
I did notice in the paperwork that we read for tonight that some municipalities are doing it on a day-by-day basis to enforce compliance faster.
Mr. Stewart? Or sorry, Mr. Milburn?
Yeah, just to clarify, we typically use some standard language in all our enforcement bylaws that each day that the offense is allowed to continue constitutes a separate offense for which you can issue an additional fine. So that's it's something that you would only do in like an extreme circumstance where there's a key issue that needs to get addressed. But certainly we always try to make sure that power is embedded in all our enforcement bylaws every day in offense.
Good, thank you. I was originally with the option one. And I've since had a brief discussion with Mr. Elmer, and I'm leaning towards option two. But don't hold me to it. I'm double thinking.
You got it. Okay. I just had some quick questions.
One last thing.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm still leaning is because I do think there is, the more we make short-term available, the less long-term available. And what I'm more concerned, and this is my concern, what I'm more concerned about is that the people who are here, who live here, have a roof over their heads. So I'm concerned about the long-term more than I am about the quick short-term rental. I do understand, I fully understand why people need short-term rental in today's world, the costs and mortgage, that it subsidizes all of that, and I do understand that. But I also don't want to infringe on the long-term rental, which is the next discussion coming up. So that's why I'm still between.
Thank you. I just had so just to be clear, if it is not a legal suite, it will not be eligible for this program. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
Yes. So you cannot get the business license unless it is a legal suite under our system, which means 5/8 fire guards, separate heating system, separate entrance, all of the requirements and trappings that we have for a legal suite in the District of North Van. Mr. Milburn.
You can have a shared heating system if you have a smoke detector actuated dampener that blocks off your HVAC system.
Yeah.
So there are ways that people can do those things, but yes, the intent is that we're looking for compliance and safety. That's a big part of
But
this.
how
I
many?
know, I just wanted to be clear about that because I think there's a lot of people expect that extra room down by the garage or something is going to all of a sudden be eligible. And so I just think we have to restate it, that it has to be a legal suite to be eligible under what we're proposing here.
That's correct.
Okay, my other question, and I know that the business licensing issue will be addressed in phase 2, so it's not a requirement out of the gate, but can we prorate a business license? So a business license is supposed to reflect our cost to administer that service, generally speaking. If someone's going to go away for 3 months and they decide to short-term rental out their place, do they have to pay the full $120 or can it be prorated to $10 a month?
I think staff are proposing $350 for short-term rentals. It's possible if that's something that council wants to provide direction on.
So otherwise, somebody who's just using it to cover the place during a vacation rental, it will never make sense if they have to buy a business license for that one instance. So I think that as we're looking to that phase 2, we should have a discussion about what a prorated business license would look like in a fair way. Because I think that's really what you're going to see a lot of in our community is people are going to go away for the Christmas holidays or they're going to go away for, the month of August and they're going to want to put their house into the pool and charging them a $350 license fee just for that instance. I think it's too much to make it a viable option. And I think that's actually a really good use of short-term rentals is when you take those peak seasons that you put a little bit extra supply into the market. Mr. Miller.
There is a challenge with that kind of prorating in terms of administrative upkeep and tracking when people are gone and not and when they're using it. We can check and see what the province is recommending. I don't think they're looking at a prorating. It's just a standard fee. If you're going to have that kind of business, it's going to generate potential complaints and other issues, and therefore we need enough revenue in order to staff and resources to fund that response, whether or not it's part of the year or not, and certainly tracking. It would be more challenging to track that kind of fee for sure, but we'll come back with more of those.
It just puts VRBOs in as an option because that's generally only used for 2 weeks a month. It's not typically an all year round inclusion in something like VRBO.
One more quick comment.
I was just going to say that unless I think I've already said it, that I'm generally supportive.
I still didn't give my opinion yet. I only
All right,
asked
I'm going to go to Councillor Pope, then I'm going to come to Councillor Mo.
No, go ahead.
Okay, Councillor Mo.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to see general support from council for option 2. I am also in support of option 2 as is. The provincial guidelines, I think, are a reasonable compromise between giving people an option to make a little extra money and to maintain rental housing stock. So this is not always the case, but I would give the provincial government credit in this case, as I believe this legislation will work for our community. Just want to point out, just because someone owns a home doesn't necessarily mean they're rich. I think homeowners still have bills to pay, and this little ability to make some money is important, especially given our current financial environment. And there's a belief or assumption that homeowners will rent out their extra dwelling units as a long-term rental if they could not engage in short-term rental. I'm not sure if that's always the case. Some of the people that I've talked to, for whatever reason, were hesitant to put their units in long-term rental. And finally, I like the option that if people have a suite and they want to have family visit every now and then, by doing short-term rentals, gives them that option. And I think there's a lot of benefit to having the option to have family visit. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think we've given a lot of feedback to staff on this issue. Councillor Pope.
Thank you. My final comment is just in regards to the federal government's announcement regarding funding for federal assistance for the short-term rental enforcement fund. And excuse me for saying this, but I'm calling BS on this because I noted in your report that we wouldn't make the deadline. Well, you know what the deadline was? You could apply between December 22nd and January 24th. Like, how does that make any sense on any level to announce that and put it out for that short time? So I wrote them and said, can we get an extension? And they replied right away, much to my surprise this afternoon, and said, no, you can't. And we realized it was a short timeline. Like, anyway, I just had to mention that.
The December goodies. Okay, Councillor.
So under this new framework, if you're going to now need a business license to run your short-term rental, are we going into people's homes to inspect these suites that are going to accommodate an Airbnb unit to make sure they have? Like how are we doing this? It all sounds really good on paper, but how do we do this? And I think this enforcement unit that the province has got is, never going to work. And, we have constant challenges on so many levels to enforce our existing bylaws.
Can I press staff for a response on this? Just Mr. Milburn?
Thank you so much. Through the mayor, there is some expectation that there will be declaration signs. So we realize that it may be difficult to go and inspect for all properties, and requiring property owners to submit declarations is a common practice. So we certainly would be looking to look for consistency and balancing the administrative cost to staff, to the municipality.
And will the issue of the utility?
To be clear though, sorry, Councillor Muir. So not necessarily.
Correct. Not necessarily going to inspect.
And will the issue of the utility charge for the secondary suites be better in the long-term rental as a question, or no? Because we have a utility charge on our secondary suites. We've had that in place for years, and it hasn't, it stayed sort of consistent. So if you have a secondary suite, you pay an extra utility charge. And is there any comment about that utility charge?
See any changes with respect to that?
The point being, it has to be a legal suite first, which means it has to be paying the $600 or $650 or whatever it is for the extra garbage charge. And then you have to pay a business license of $350, and then you're starting. That's going to be a bit problematic.
Well, it'll be a bit more problematic for the
We have to have
long-term rentals.
We have to come up with a prorated scheme or something for it to be able to accommodate that.
Okay. Now long-term?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Council, I noticed our energy levels have dropped off after the Ferrero Rocher chocolate crash.
We're just gonna quickly do this one?
This one's pretty quick.
Yeah.
So if you're okay with it, just have your own stretch on your own time. I'm gonna charge through. If you need to get up and stretch and grab a drink, please feel free to do that. Mr. Milburn, any opening comments?
Zero. Okay, some introductory comments.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get you to go ahead right away. as soon as
Sure,
you're ready.
let's get started while John gets set up. So good evening, your worship, council and members of the public. Staff tonight are bringing forward a workshop item here that would propose improvements to the regulatory framework and business licensing of long-term rentals. The impetus for this work draws on previous feedback from council in which quality of life, health, and safety of renters is an important issue for council, and to which staff is responding by proposing improvements or bylaw amendments to the regulatory framework for long-term rentals to help ensure and support the provision of healthy and safe rental properties. And relatedly, it's also an opportune time to consider a comprehensive framework for all housing units that are operated as a business use or as an investment property. So bookending, if you will, short-term rentals on one end and long-term rentals on the other. So as part of this workshop item, staff will be sharing information on long-term rentals in the district, business licensing practices and regulations of long-term rentals in other jurisdictions, and we'll be seeking council direction on a comprehensive regulatory framework that would improve the licensing of purpose-built rental, as well as expanding or capturing long-term rentals in the secondary market. So with that, John Maselli, our community planner, has prepared a presentation for council's information. And with council's permission, I would like to extend the floor to John.
We're just gonna, I see Mr. Stewart's hand up, so we're just gonna see his additional comments at the front end before we carry on. Mr. Stewart?
I'm sorry I continue to do this all night, but I think what's really important is, and hopefully it's covered in your presentation, is how do we deal with landowners that have rental properties that denigrate them? Let them absolutely, become, inhospitable. And what can we or can't we do about that? Because that is a pattern that we're seeing in the municipality, is that, and I think we're seeing it around the lower mainland, is that people just allow things to get so bad that they get, we saw with the Dunsmuir Hotel today. The fact of the matter is, we don't have it doesn't seem we have a regulatory ability to make sure that people maintain their properties. So I'm hoping that staff will comment on that.
I hope that too. There you go. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public. My name is John Maselli, and I'm a planner in the Community Planning Department at the district. And I'm here this evening to present a proposed update to our existing business licensing regulations for long-term rentals in our community. For clarity, long-term rentals are typically considered as any residential unit rented out on a month-to-month basis or for longer periods, which distinguishes them from short-term rentals, which we have also sought feedback on tonight. Right now, the district only requires operators of purpose-built apartment units to apply for a business license. And while working on the proposed short-term rental licensing framework, staff have identified an opportunity to update and improve upon how we handle the licensing of long-term rental units. So this presentation will take approximately 10 minutes, and will review three key areas. First, the current rental housing context in the district. Second, how other municipalities are managing long-term rental licensing. And lastly, a proposed framework and implementation strategy. So let's begin by looking at our current rental housing context. I've got a pie chart here, which shows the breakdown of rental units in the district. Currently, we have over 7,700 rental units, which form a crucial part of our housing supply. And since 2006, we've seen the number of total rental units grow by 41%. Looking at the composition, about 33% or 2,500 units are purpose-built rentals. And these are the only units currently covered by our business license bylaw. The blue portion of a chart representing 67% of our rental stock, or about 5,100 units, shows our secondary rental market. And this includes approximately 2,100 secondary suites, along with rented condos and single-family homes. And these units currently operate outside our licensing framework. While these secondary market units provide essential housing options, we currently have limited ability to track them or ensure that they meet safety standards. This affects not only our understanding of a rental market, but also the health and well-being of renters. And this brings us to why there is a need to update the current licensing framework. The answer comes down to the three key objectives listed here that will help a district better manage our growing rental housing stock. First, the proposed framework would improve business licensing enforcement and compliance. As mentioned, under the current business license bylaw, many long-term rental units operate without proper licensing. Second, the framework would improve the district's data collection capabilities. Better tracking of rental units will provide a clearer understanding of a rental housing continuum and will support evidence-based decision-making when planning future housing policies. And third, the framework would help ensure the safety and security of our residents by confirming that rental units meet building safety and maintenance standards. So together with the short-term rental regulations, this update would provide a comprehensive oversight over all long-term rental properties in the district. And to make sure that the proposed framework aligns with best practices, staff looked at how other municipalities across Metro Vancouver manage long-term rental licensing. And what was found is that the majority of municipalities, including the City of North Vancouver and the District of West Vancouver, require business licenses for long-term rentals. Based on the typical licensing framework and costs across the region, staff found that the median annual licensing fee is $121.50 per unit. And when it comes to enforcement, most municipalities use bylaw tickets and fines, typically operating on a complaint basis. And this is similar to our current enforcement method in the district. And for council's reference, a detailed breakdown of all municipal approaches is included in the attachments to the council report, which provides more specific information about fee structures and enforcement mechanisms across municipalities. So now let's look at the specific elements of the proposed licensing framework. In terms of licensing requirements, staff are suggesting that all long-term rental units require a business license. And this would include any residential unit rented for 29 days or more, regardless of the type of dwelling. And this ensures consistency across all rental types. And staff are suggesting an annual fee of $120 per rental unit, which would amount to $10 a month. This closely aligns with the median fee applied across Metro Vancouver municipalities. And this fee will also help cover the costs of administration and enforcement. In terms of the application process, a property owner would need to provide certain information about their property, including their contact details, the number of units they're renting, and a declaration that their rental units meet all safety standards and bylaw requirements. And just like short-term rentals, enforcement and communication would be an important approach. So under the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, we would address non-compliance by including more appropriate fines specifically targeted towards long-term rental licensing violations. Should council provide direction to support this framework, staff would bring forward the following amendments. The business license bylaw would be updated with new definitions and include fee exemptions for nonprofit and supportive housing providers. The fees and charges bylaw would be streamlined to reflect a new annual fee structure. And the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw would be updated to include appropriate enforcement fines. And these coordinated updates would create a clear and consistent approach to regulating both purpose-built and secondary market long-term rentals. So tonight, staff have presented a draft licensing framework that would apply to all long-term rentals in the district, and we are seeking feedback on this approach. And if council is supportive of the direction outlined in this presentation and report, the next steps will be to prepare formal bylaw amendments for consideration at the next regular meeting of council. And if the bylaws are adopted, the staff would begin implementation through 2 phases, beginning with phase 1, focused on community engagement, education, and awareness, followed by phase 2, which would establish mandatory compliance requirements. And now I'll flip to a brief summary of what was discussed during this presentation. So in summary, staff recommends that all long-term rentals be subject to an annual licensing fee of $120 per unit, which amounts to a modest fee of $10 per month. The implementation would be phased over an educational period, which would then transition to mandatory compliance. For enforcement, we propose updated fines specifically drafted for long-term rental violations. And importantly, these licensing updates are designed to work in tandem with either of the previously discussed short-term rental licensing options. So this is the conclusion of the presentation. Thank you for your time, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Now, I see Mr. Stewart's hand up, so before we go to Mr. Stewart, Mr. Maselli, I'm gonna ask you the question. How in this framework can we stop the situation where long-term rentals are deteriorating to the advantage of the owner, to the disadvantage of the renter? The example that comes to mind is Branches on 27th. Before it became Branches, the combination of the owners and the occupants didn't want the repairs done because it was going to cause the rents to go up. And so you had a leak in the pool that emptied out, and then when the water table came up, it lifted the pool out of the ground, and it flooded all of the car park and flooded all of the storage areas, and nobody wanted to say anything because they didn't want their rents to go up. And so what tools do we have in our system to address obvious intentional deterioration of purpose-built rental in our community?
So right now, the intent is to just have the property owner sign a declaration saying that the unit is safe for occupancy. This is just due to administrative costs of having bylaw enforcement officers inspect every unit that is applied for. But obviously that is an option to have that inspection take place when the license is applied for. And the license would need to be renewed every year. So this is a continuous approach that either a declaration would be signed, which would limit the liability on the district in the case of a unit deteriorating, or inspections could occur on a regular basis.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I guess the challenge is the ultimate situation there is that someone is going to be engaged in a rent eviction. That eventually it will, there's not a lot we can do to stop the product from eventually being forced into a rent eviction, which displaces people anyway. Mr. Stewart, I see your hand, followed by Mr. Milberg.
Yeah, I just, while I appreciate the administrative approach to this, it's not solving the problem. And the problem is folks that are being evicted because of development. And I would really much prefer an approach that says, how can we stop that? As opposed to some administrative rule that, we just continue to find a way to deal with the stuff, but in sequence, but not at the end of the day making a difference. And so what I'm most concerned about is this continued advent of developers kicking people out. And I just think the construction of North Vancouver, what we are, if we just continue to allow all of the low-income people to be kicked out of North Vancouver, I'm really concerned about that, and I don't know that this administrative rule will achieve that. So that's what I'm concerned about.
Mr. Milburn.
I guess I would just add a couple fundamental points around enforcement. The building blocks of successful enforcement to address the issue of people that, let their units deteriorate are fundamentally around a few points. And one of those is education and awareness. So fundamentally, all of our bylaws rely on, first and foremost, voluntary compliance. We have never, and we will never have the resources to go and enforce if everybody doesn't comply. It would be very, very difficult because we're generally enforcing community standards, which council is setting. And for the most part, people want to comply, which is a great thing, okay? But education and awareness is our first and foremost always approach with enforcement. And what staff are recommending to implement this approach is to increase education and awareness of community expectations around having clean and safe locations. Right now, we do receive periodic complaints under the standards of maintenance bylaw. It currently applies to all rental properties for which there is a rental tenancy agreement. So that's already in place. But we have very little awareness about that, I think, in the community, which results in few complaints. So a big part of this is around education awareness. So that's one of the key building blocks. The other is having easy to understand and implement rules for enforcement. So of course, we have standards at the provincial level through the Residential Tenancy Act, safe accommodation. However, we don't get involved in those appeals and discussions, right? We don't insert ourselves into those discussions. But if we had a licensing system, we could bolster and support those conversations by ensuring that having an additional tool to ensure that if there is a unworthy landlord or tenant that is causing troubles, that we can ask that those issues be rectified through the licensing system. And so having education, clear rules, and the third is resources. We do not currently have the resources to often chase after potentially every issue that might come up. And we anticipate that with increased awareness means we'll have more complaints. People will realize their rights and they need to be enforced. And having resources, having a business license will be critical to having the resources to be able to enforce. So education, clear rules, and the money to do it are three key building blocks. When it comes time to dealing with very negative landowners who will not comply, they often require very protracted, not just enforcement mechanisms through fines, but actually through court action. We've seen that on the North Shore where some have had to go to court multiple times to obtain enforcement, and having key resources, staff dedicated to it is the key way to go to ground on those key issues and really problematic sites. So what we're recommending is a system of education, a system of clear rules, and having some additional resources through this $120 a year on those licenses so that we can implement a robust enforcement approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. Council comments? Councilor Marion?
I'm with Mr. Stewart. I don't think this is going to, I mean, I see two groups here. I see apartment building owners, and then I see secondary suite owners. You know, I don't see revenue generated from this to put in place the resources and the inspectors that we need. To go and do what? I mean, we have a standard of maintenance bylaw, and I mean, we get few complaints, I think, because people over the year have tried to activate it and it doesn't do anything. You know, we've got old apartment units, and we have to remember that the old units, I mean, Mr. Stewart used the Dunsmuir Hotel. That's one of the most egregious examples that we've seen where developers kept deferring and deferring and blaming and deferring. And now we'll see, they could levy a fine of $50 million on the whole Burn Group, but will they? That's going to be interesting to see if the city of Vancouver actually, you know, holds up to their permit or their fine system. So old housing, old apartment housing is the affordable housing. That's what people can afford. And I bet if our inspectors went into some of that older housing, they could find all sorts of things that don't line up with code or don't work. And then it's like, then what happens? Then it's like, oh, you're out. I've seen examples of developers owning apartment buildings and complaints from residents that have come to me where there was water dripping and mold. there was a stove that had to be kept on because the gas stove was broken and they had to keep it on all the time in order for the leak not to, go through the house. Roofs that have had, their tiles, just they lay them over top over years. That's how they fix it. They don't ever take the tiles off, or the Duroid tiles off, and replace it properly. They just add on another later. As the mayor pointed out, it's just then, oh, we're beyond our level of repair. We can't look after it anymore. Now we have to redevelop it. For the basement suite, the rancher, with a basement that has a tenant, a business license, is it a business, or is it, for some people, a mortgage helper? For some people, it's a brand new house with a full height basement, and it's for the family. I just think there's so many variables in this thing, and we're trying to cover it all off by an administrative fee that I don't think is going to address any of this. There has to be some hard hammers laid down. I think there's a number of units in this municipality in old rental blocks that are empty. I'm more interested in filling them up with the people that are living on the street or sleeping at the bus stops. But as soon as somebody moves out of those rental units, owners never want to re-rent them again if they have redevelopment in their sites. So I think there's a lot of work on this still, because there's two very distinct groups of people: property owners of multifamily buildings, and then secondary suites. And maybe a family that's bought an investment unit and they rent it out, like one unit that they've bought. I have a unit at Whistler. I don't pay any of these fees in the resort municipality of Whistler. I just pay my taxes. And there's short-term and long-term, nightly, two different zones in Whistler, nightly and then short-term. And so I don't think that this is going to actually address those really egregious issues that we have. And I'd like to understand the complement of bylaw enforcement officers that we have, how many we're going to need to be able to pull off all of these issues that we've discussed tonight, what kind of resources we're going to need, what the cost is going to be in the municipality, and if we are even able and successful in hiring additional bylaw enforcement officers. Because in the summertime, we are so stretched with bylaw enforcement. I don't know how we have the time to go after all of this for $120 a year. Or per, for the secondary suites, and then per unit. Is that really going to even cover the cost of the administration? It's certainly not going to cover the cost of the hourly wage for a bylaw enforcement officer. And we probably need another 10 or 15 of those just to cover all the issues that we've got right now, let alone adding this. So I think we need to think about this one and come back and not give any direction on this one right now.
The next speaker I had was Councillor Ma.
Thank you for this. I do have some questions. It kind of pertains to the short-term rentals. I'm looking at the rate that you're proposing for the business license. If I heard correctly, the short-term rentals was going to be about 300. And for long-term rentals is 120. I mean, just help me to understand that difference. I mean, throughout the night, you kept hearing consistency, 28 days here and there. The rates are different. Is there a reason for that?
Right. The idea here is just to update our current fees to meet like a median level that was observed across Metro Vancouver municipalities. It wasn't really to like match the level of short-term rentals necessarily. Staff were kind of thinking that once you reach a certain level, it becomes too unmanageable to have such a high fee for long-term rentals. So we're just attempting to meet the median fee.
Yeah. Your worship, to Councillor Ma, there's many more rentals, like long-term rentals, than short-term rentals, and so we'd be collecting a total just more fee. It's an estimate based on the amount of anticipated administration and enforcement related to enforcing the bylaw. we would adjust the rates over time. These are both short-term rentals and long-term rentals are quite new and proposed. So we would monitor the costs of enforcement and adjust and come back with further recommendations. This would be our first attempt to try to capture the necessary resources, but we could adjust over time.
To me, there's benefits to both short-term and long-term rentals, and I just don't want the fees, and especially when Mayor Mike mentioned that if you're doing short-term rentals, you're gonna pay the utilities and the fee that, that's gonna get quite high before, you'll make money on short-term rentals. But okay, if that's just a starting point. I just want to follow up on an earlier question too. Pro rating. When I talk to some people that were thinking, okay, I may rent long-term, but they're very concerned about, selecting the right tenants. And some of them were more open to doing students, like from the colleges and universities. Is there any thought, or would it be too administratively difficult to prorate that? Like, I want to rent out my unit for 9 months, because if it's not a good tenant, 9 months he's gone. Is there any thought to that?
We can give you some advice back on that. I can say certainly when you set criteria and so on, it can be more challenging because most of the time people like flexibility at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So they might have an intention, but then at the end of the day, they'll rent to what works. And so it's hard for us to then backtrack and try to clarify at a later date. So the more nuance and particulars you put in, the more it is a challenge to enforce.
No, I get it.
I see additional comments from Mr. Stewart.
Your worship, 120 per unit, something that's probably renting for $2,000 to $3,000 is just as much as I appreciate that it's conservative, it's not substantive at the end of the day. You could raise that by 5 times and people would still make money. So I just want to put this in perspective a little bit. This is a very minor inference in terms of what we could do or not do.
Councillor Baugh, additional comments or you're complete?
No, I'm also hearing Councillor Murray says, it's just going to really achieve what we want. And I'm not sure on that. I'd just like to hear other people's opinions as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Back.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I guess when I look at the secondary market and the fact that, that makes up close to 70% of the rental housing in our community, I'm questioning what the goal is of implementing something like this. And if it's to incentivize more rental units, which I think to some degree we want to see, people being long-term landlords, I don't think it's going to do that. I think it might actually add another, layer that might discourage people. And it's not the $120. I agree that's not a very large amount considering what people would be renting out their units for. But I just think this needs some more thought. I agree with lots of the comments that Councillor Murray made in terms of, is this really going to address the problematic landlords who are letting their rental homes, really fall into disrepair. And I just think, I wonder how much consultation we've done, if there's been any consultation with, organizations that like Landlord BC, for example, or just to see how this would fit. But I see this as a bit of a disincentive at a time when, there's lots of restrictions being put on people that, may not want to be landlords just because of all the restrictions around, dealing with all of the different layers of fees and whatnot. So I think this is a start of an interesting discussion, but I'm not prepared to support it right now.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. My comments are much along the lines of all my councillor colleagues. We're wanting to incentivize rental. There's all these big homes across the district that are being minimally occupied. And it would be better if there were more secondary suites, if there was more rental of these homes. And we're creating a level of bureaucracy that I'm not sure that it's in the end going to serve the tenants, who are the people we're trying to protect. It's going to create an extra cost. In the end, that'll be borne by the tenants. So in the end, we're increasing rental costs, likely shrinking rental availability. You know, I just think maybe it has to be thought through more. I think the unintended consequences of this may actually not serve tenants.
Councillor Forbes?
I appreciate everything that's been said, but I think this is a good start. And I mean, the city of North Van and the district of West Van already have licensing. Is that correct for long-term?
Yes.
So we're the outlier that we haven't done this. So, and I also think consistency, we should have business license for long-term if we have for short-term. So I think this is a really good start at it, and I think we should put something in place. I agree with what's been said about $120. I don't know why we always try to be the low bidder for everything. It seems our fines are lower than other municipalities and this kind of thing. So, and I guess if we take this to a further discussion, what are we really trying to solve? Because I think the discussion around the table, which I respect everybody's discussion, but I think there's a mixed kind of bag here. You are talking about licensing to have a little bit of control on that. The other thing is the maintenance regulation. So maybe that, you know, both things should be looked at the same time. Is there any way we could look at our maintenance bylaw and have it included in this? So that's where I think I could see some further discussion to maybe combine those things. But I do think if the city and the District of West Van already have it, I mean, we must be able to find a solution here, but maybe a little more time. Thank you. Thanks for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Pope?
I only have one quick question to add to the comments that have been made. In terms of, there's 7,700 rental units in total, and including 2,100 secondary suites. Are those all what we call, or I don't know what the name is, but legal suites? The secondary suites, are they all the ones that we know of that, and we only know of them because they are legal suites? So is that correct?
Yeah, these are for registered.
We don't have the data, I'm guessing, on how many non-legal suites there are. Is that correct?
Every year, people come in to us and regularize their suites, and we bring them up to compliance. It was in part how we achieved our housing target this year, as we had a lot of people that had suites that hadn't registered them previously, and so they were brought up to compliance. So it happens all the time, but we don't know what we don't know. So, and we don't go and inspect every single home in the district, so we find out about it all the time. What we're proposing here is a tool that would give us additional resources and so on to be able to do just that, to ensure that we have more compliance.
Well, I must say I am concerned about the safety standards. I think that's the main argument for having this kind of extra bureaucracy. But I am hearing what many of the other councillors have said about concerns about unintended consequences and all of that. And I think that mainly the problem that landlords are the ones that aren't doing the legal suites. And that's where you find the non-compliance with safety, issues and things. So, yeah, it's a problem.
Councillor Weir, do you have an additional comment?
I was just going to say that I think West Van and the city, they've got a large inventory of purpose-built rental. And the city's, developing more market, but they've got a lot of rental as well. And I do think there is a difference between a secondary suite in a home and a rental unit in a multifamily building. And that's where I think it needs to kind of be separated. We legalized suites years and years and years ago and had people sign declaration, and it was a very big thing. And There was lots of media on it. We were the first to do it in the region. And lots of people came forward. They wanted to be honest about their suites, right? They had a problem if, they kept an extra stove down to do turkey dinner at Christmas and us making them remove their stove. They didn't like that. But, I just want to, it just rubs me the wrong way that we're always wondering if our residents are trying to pull a fast one on us. It's like the yearly passes that we have to get, for parking, because we don't want them to photocopy them and, give them out to their friends. There's got to be a level of trust with our citizens and our residents that I believe that most people want to do the right thing, and of course, there's always going to be some people that want to try to, cheat the system. But I think the vast majority of residents that are living in our community want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that their suites and their basements are safe for their tenants, and I think they are. I do believe, though, that there is there has been a significant issue, and I wish that you guys were here and had brought this forward, 20 years ago, because we've lost a lot of older affordable housing because property owners go, oh, it's too old, it's beyond its life. Like, tell anybody in Europe that. And I don't care if it's wood frame, there's houses in my neighborhood that are wood frame that are 75 years old, 80 years old, and they've been looked after and maintained, and they're as good as they were. It's the property owner that's going to put the money and the attention into it. And, there's lots of examples, but those are the kinds of ones that you want to deal with. So, I'd be interested in what you could bring forward to hammer that part of it, not the little guy that's just renting a basement suite out, right, to create extra housing.
That's for position.
My comments, I'm thinking more along the multi-residential buildings. That's what I'm thinking of. I'm not thinking about basement suites, but if we're gonna, this is just labeled long-term rentals, so it would apply to basement suites or multi-residential. So my concern is the multi-residential. That's the one, the purpose-built rentals have been torn down.
I think you've heard from the council that there isn't a consensus forming in support of this time. Rather, it can change in form and maybe better address some of the risks and issues around the deterioration of units, or some other mechanisms that we can maybe explore to make it a more effective framework for managing the units. Then maybe there would be more support for it. So, I think that's the feedback we've heard from the room. At my peril, at this late hour, I'll address another issue that's frustrating me, that's very much related to this question: the unintended consequences. So, the provincial government comes along and says, we're going to cap rental rates going forward, and in doing so, they've mobilized all of the landowners on purpose-built rental as a part of the social apparatus. They're part of the welfare system in that they're not going to have a market rate going forward. They're going to have whatever the capped rate is going to be going forward. And so they're mobilized in that way. And we also, the great advantage of it is you cap the increases. The people that are currently in there know what they're going to pay. They know what it's going to be increased by. But the further it diverges from the market value, the unintended consequence of a policy like that is that you end up deepening and deepening and deepening the subsidy to the point that the poor landlords get rewarded. They have a higher churn rate. They can return to market more frequently by not repairing units, by having a terrible relationship with their tenants, and they get rewarded for it. And the ones that have an excellent relationship are prompt, Johnny on the spot, repairing that thing that needs to be dealt with. They end up having very long tenures, which is great, but it means that they diverge from market more dramatically over time. And so they get disincentivized to be a good landlord in our current system. And I find that to be an absolutely frustrating situation, that we, with eyes wide open, know we're incentivizing bad landlords in our system. And so as we go forward in this, any tools you can think of in this area that help us address that issue of disincentivizing being a good, conscientious, responsive landlord versus the other alternative is something I'd be interested in.
Think outside the box and get creative.
All right. I see no further speakers on this matter.
Move adjournment.
No, we do have members of the public present.
Oh,
And-
sorry.
and I know
Want to hear.
You know, it's a bit of a strange situation. You've already had the discussion, Council. The purpose for having members of the public speak at the end of a committee meeting, we don't actually reach decisions at this. We refer it to a regular council meeting and then we actually have the decision. So your feedback is still welcome. Your feedback still helps us form those decisions at this time. And so just because it's at the end of the night, please don't feel like it's not warranted, valued, and
Yes.
plays a role in it. So with that said, our policy is to add an additional, to have up to 10 minutes of public input at the end of the meeting. Mr. Stewart, are your comments for now or for the very
Yeah,
end?
no, my only comment is we were voted one of the most livable cities in.
Oh.
I know you're gonna get some controversy on that, but you know what? It's better than nothing, folks. So,
There's no question we have to keep it all in the context of how good it is, but I'm glad that everybody's still got their eye on the prize of improving things.
Yeah.
So we have as our policy up to 10 minutes at the end of the council workshop for comments from members of the public. Yes, please, Kathy.
Don't I always have something to say? Okay, this is about the short-term rental stuff. I keep hearing around this table the issue of affordability. What you've just done, I don't know if all of you remember, but when we had COVID, and so we didn't have short-term rentals, there was suddenly a huge
Yeah.
increase in the vacancy rate.
Yeah.
So while I'm very appreciative of people wanting to make money off of their secondary suites, they are making money. They might just not be making as much money. The other thing is that I also know, because we had somebody on the rental and social housing task force who had did short-term rental, and he said trouble with long-term rentals is you can't get rid of the tenants when they're bad tenants. So I appreciate that there are problems with long-term rental, but if you're interested in affordability, what you just said is completely contrary to what you want.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the public this evening? Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you to the staff for preparing the reports for our consideration tonight. Thank you, members of the public, for coming out and listening and preparing your comments, and to members of council for your deliberations on these matters. Appreciate your efforts. I will just say one last thing. Wednesday and Thursday, we are expecting snow. And so just be prepared for that possibility. The first snowfall of the year generally goes very poorly for drivers in this community. So plan your days accordingly on Wednesday and Thursday. On behalf of the council, thank you all and have a great evening.